The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 476 Super Useful Humanoid Power Bank. Putting aside Thor, who is undergoing a worldview collapse and reconstruction, and who is acting like a father and son, the Avengers who first set foot in Sherlock's family training grounds were also quite surprised. Yes, I'm talking about Dr. Banner. How should I put it? Dr. Banner suddenly felt like he was at his girlfriend's house, especially when he saw the Black Widows in the tower, who were greeting Black Widow. Although Black Widow held Dr. Banner's arm the entire time to give him courage, the extreme nervousness still made him walk almost unsteadily. Honestly, it was a good thing that Black Widow's parents didn't live in Sherlock's family training grounds. Otherwise, given Dr. Banner's current attitude, he might even have let the Hulk out. Although the Hulk didn't come out, it didn't make things any better either. Banner looked at Black Widow with a look of grievance. When we were dating, you didn't tell me I would have so many sisters-in-law. If this were a New Year's or holiday get-together, with nothing more than a glass of wine per person, not only would Banner, but even the Hulk would be flat on his face. He even wondered how many Christmas gifts he'd need. In just a short while, Banner was already worrying about his wallet. He even started to wonder if he should learn some business from Tony. Otherwise, he had no idea if he could really handle this large group of sisters-in-law. Of course, Falcon probably shared Banner's concerns. Ever since arriving at Sherlock's training grounds, Falcon had been clutching his head in thought as he saw everyone's houses. Was there some misunderstanding? Why did everyone else have their own room, but he had to share with Captain? The more Falcon thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. Even the way he looked at Captain was starting to look strange. All Falcon could think about was, wouldn't it be too abrupt if I withdrew from the operation now? I wanted to go home and check it out. Of course, aside from these minor issues, Sherlock's home was more than twice as comfortable as the penthouse at Stark Tower. The large bathhouse, in particular, garnered the admiration of nearly every new Avenger. It naturally became the venue for the Avengers' discussion and analysis, in swimsuits, of course, since this wasn't the enemy's territory, and the necessary amenities were there. Just like in the movie, Thor didn't participate in this discussion and analysis, instead going to see his father, Odin. In the movie, Thor would likely have sought out Jane's mentor, who would have taken him to a place called the Spring of True Sight for a dream analysis. But now that he had his own father, Thor naturally had a better option. After all, this ability was inherited from him, and no one could understand his dreams better than his own father. Faced with his son's rare request, Odin, having completely calmed down, naturally agreed to teach Thor. Borrowing a tactical classroom from Sherlock's family training ground, Odinson's dream class began. Well, Odin's idea was a good one, and Thor's choice was the right one. However, they both overlooked one crucial point, a truth that has been held since ancient times, both in China and abroad, and even beyond Earth itself. If you don't learn from your parents' kindness, your children will become chaotic once you do. Helping children with their studies is always the most frustrating task for parents everywhere. This holds true even on Asgard. Even now, the setting is still Earth. Odin gushed forth a tactical lecture, but Thor, a brainy figure, only responded with a single nodding cat emoji. This infuriated Odin to the point where he began to wonder if Loki was his own son. Otherwise, how could he be so clueless? Honestly, Odin was now thankful he'd let Loki become a trainee god king. Otherwise, with Thor's cluelessness, Asgard would likely be bankrupt in a few years. Even after Odin's teaching stick had broken 3 or 4 times, Thor still didn't understand what Odin was saying. Forced to give up on his theoretical teaching, Odin finally gave up. After all, for someone as brainy as Thor, the best thing to do was to get his hands dirty and experience the real deal. It wasn't because he was going to have a heart attack if he continued, absolutely not. Unlike in the movies, with Odin as the legitimate god king, there was no need to search for the fountain of true sight. Odin simply handed Thor a shovel and began to direct him. That's right, Odin wanted Thor to dig a hole up to his shoulders. Although Thor didn't understand what his father was going to do, he obeyed without hesitation, transforming into an excavator and starting to dig. Just as Thor was turning into a laborer, Frigga, returning from shopping, came over to check on her son. Odin and Frigga exchanged whispered something, Then Frigga rolled her eyes at Odin, casually pointed at the watering can, and left. At Frigga's touch, the can began to radiate magical light. When Thor's pit was almost complete, Odin stopped him and, with a single stroke, buried him completely in the earth, leaving only his head exposed. Before Thor could grasp what was happening, Odin grabbed Frigga's enchanted watering can and poured water over his head. The scene was both eerie and comical, as if Odin had planted Thor and hoped to produce a bunch of new Thors the following year. Of course, these were all illusions. When Odin poured water from the watering can onto Thor's head, Thor's eyes immediately became shrouded in a white mist, as if he had entered some mysterious state. Meanwhile, sparks began to emanate from the exposed head, silvery arcs of electricity enveloping Thor's head, giving him a genuine resemblance to the god of thunder. Of course, that was if Thor hadn't been buried. As for why Odin buried Thor, the reason was simple: to minimize his impact. After all, this was Sherlock's family training ground, and some things weren't meant to be known to the trainees. Of course, Odin, now a seasoned farmer, wouldn't let Thor's talents go to waste. He immediately connected several wires to Thor's exposed head. Looking at the automatic sprinkler system activated by Thor's own electricity and the charging electric scooter, Odin nodded in satisfaction. After all, his foolish son was still somewhat useful. Chapter 477 Bathroom Meeting. While Thor was acting as a human power source, Sherlock's bathhouse was abuzz with activity. Under the protection of the water company, the Avengers gathered in groups of 3 or 4 in the hot tub, discussing Ultron's next move. It's true that the environment can actually influence human thinking. Believe it or not, your brain is at its most active when you're sitting on the toilet. Similarly, the steamy air and the relaxing heat of the hot water quickly heighten the thinking of the people of this small nation. Of course, this level of mental activity has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it allows for the creation of ideas that would normally be unthinkable, while the disadvantage is that these ideas can be incredibly imaginative. Some speculate that Ultron is attempting to build a vibranium-clad, invulnerable body to fight us. Others speculate that he's creating a vibranium-clad robot Avengers, allowing them to fight each other. Even more outrageous, some even suggest that Ultron might be creating a nuclear-like superweapon capable of wiping out everyone on Earth with a single detonation. Well, for the sake of everyone's reputation, Sherlock won't mention any names here, but are you serious about that idea of using vibranium in a nuclear bomb? So, Ultron is just bored and wants to see how powerful a nuclear explosion is compared to vibranium? If the yield is smaller, the nuclear explosion inside the bomb's head would be completely destroyed, while the shell is still intact. So, do you want Ultron to experience what it means to have a useless weapon, or to feel the sensation of a nuclear explosion right next to him? This is a brilliant idea. If I could give it a score, Sherlock would definitely give it an 81. The remaining 18 points are sent as 666, one less point to prevent him from being too proud of his own idea. Fortunately, although these people's ideas were unreliable, Banner and Tony still had a serious attitude towards science. They borrowed Captain America's shield and used it in the lab to conduct experiments. Even while they were taking a bath, they kept an eye on the tablet that kept displaying experimental data. Soon, a piece of experimental data caught Banner's attention. It showed that vibranium possessed a unique property: it could combine various cellular tissues compatible with a human body, even allowing for coal mining. In other words, with enough vibranium, humanity could fully develop towards mechanical ascension. Evolving into a human composed entirely of vibranium, cyberpunk could be just around the corner. The moment this thought struck Banner, he instantly grasped the key point: evolution. Ultron wants to evolve. He's not content to just control a soulless puppet. He wants a perfect body. That's why he seized vibranium. As Banner spoke his thoughts, he handed the lab report to Tony, whose face flushed red as he sat beside him. Tony's pupils involuntarily constricted when he saw the data. It's true that a body composed entirely of vibranium is enough to make anyone envious, but there was a crucial matter before them all. How exactly could Ultron use vibranium to create a living body? This problem was a near-fatal flaw. Creating a mechanical body out of vibranium would be easy for both Ultron and Tony. But it clearly didn't align with Ultron's desire for evolution. To truly experience the world, he had to be alive. Only by being alive could he truly feel the rustle of wind, the scent of grass, and the delicious taste of food. Just as the two were puzzled as to how Ultron could create a living body, Hawkeye stood up from the sink, ready to shower and wash his hair. They immediately noticed the scars on Hawkeye's kidney, which had been injured and lost in Sokovia. Dr. Helen, 2 Tony and Banner shouted in unison, calling out the name of someone who could create a living body. Hawkeye's kidney was a byproduct of Dr. Helen's project called the Regeneration Cradle. Honestly, the Regeneration Cradle was similar to a 3D printer, capable of printing a living body from cells and elements. With a clear direction, everyone no longer wanted to hang around. They packed up and began to plan their mission. Tony naturally had to go to the Origin Server Center to retrieve the real Jarvis, while the rest of the group planned to find Dr. Zhao Helen and, incidentally, stop Ultron's next move. Since the last incident at Stark Tower, Dr. Helen had returned to her laboratory, which was quite a distance from the Eagle Sauce, so everyone needed to leave as soon as possible. Han Country is a typical peninsula country located in the northeast corner of the Rabbit State. According to the Rabbits' preferences, they call them Little Pickles when they are happy, and Little Westy when they are unhappy. As everyone knows, Han Country, as the center of the universe, although it is a colony of the Eagle Sauce, is actually far away from New York. Including in his previous life, this was Sherlock's second time setting foot on this country that can fully nurture extraordinary things. As everyone knows, the entire Han Kingdom only has 2 cities, Busan and Seoul, the capital of these idiots. Dr. Helen's laboratory is located on the banks of the Han River, known for its high Viagra content. The good news is that when everyone arrived, they confirmed that Ultron had indeed entered Dr. Helen's lab and used Dr. Helen's cradle of life to create a living vibranium body. He also taunted Captain America, saying that Captain America was using the most amazing material in the world and was playing with it like a frisbee. The bad news is that by the time everyone arrived, Ultron had already left, leaving behind only the ruined lab and a wounded Dr. Helen. Fortunately, a dazed Dr. Helen informed them that Ultron had recently left. Sherlock stayed in the lab to care for and treat Dr. Helen, while the rest of the group pursued Ultron, who had fled with a cradle of life. After Sherlock performed emergency medical treatment on Dr. Helen and injected her with a large amount of potion, he made sure that Dr. Helen was stable and understood the side effects of his potion. Then, Sherlock hurriedly left to support the Avengers. After all, without Tony, the Avengers' aerial combat capabilities were too weak if they only relied on Falcon. Even if they scared Ultron, they had to go to support. However, what Sherlock never expected was that although he had lost support in name, in reality, Sherlock was still doing the job of cleaning up the mess. Chapter 478 Sherlock, the Master of Wiping Ass 20. After Sherlock dealt with Dr. Helen, he soared into the air on his broomstick, following the hovering helicopter to the battlefield. He spotted Black Widow returning the shield to Captain. Captain was wielding his vibranium frisbee, engaging 2 robots and Ultron. Sherlock, not caring whether he was supposed to be helping them, simply tucked his broom into his own kingdom and flashed onto the roof of the car. The moment Sherlock appeared, he unleashed 2 shattering curses, shattering the 2 robots attacking Captain. Ultron was startled by Sherlock's presence. Under normal circumstances, Ultron would have abandoned his current body and fled, but this was clearly not an option. Within this car lay the key to Ultron's evolution. Running was impossible, the Iron Legion robots couldn't handle the data transmissions from Ultron's car. However, under the pressure of Sherlock's presence, Ultron seized the moment Captain wasn't paying attention and leaped off the roof, carrying him. Sherlock watched helplessly as the 2 men leaped from the roof of the train into the subway car, approaching from the nearby elevated overpass. He didn't even have time to react. Sherlock lacked their physical prowess, and even if he wanted to, it would have been impossible. Desperate, Sherlock could only deal with the now out-of-control semi-trailer truck. His solution was simple. A single shattering curse reduced the entire front of the truck, along with the robots inside, to a pile of fragments. As the front of the truck vanished, the front end of the car suddenly stabbed into the ground, gliding forward in a shower of sparks and lightning. As the slowing car slowed, Black Widow, on her motorcycle, finally caught up with the vanished truck. Without even slowing, Black Widow leaped directly into the open car on her electric scooter. She then communicated with Sherlock to quickly get the car up into the air. She was determined to escape the body Ultron had created for her. After hearing Black Widow's words, Sherlock immediately cast a full-throttle levitation spell. Under Sherlock's magic, the carriage, without a front end, seemed to have lost its gravity and began to move towards Hawkeye's plane, which was hovering in the air. Of course, Black Widow wasn't idle either. Using the acceleration of her motorcycle, she directly crashed into a robot guard in the cradle of life. Then, using her agility and equipment, she overloaded another robot and quickly began to pack up. While Black Widow was busy with her, Ultron, who was happily fighting with Captain America on the other side, also learned of the situation in the other carriage. Captain America was also very cunning. He knew that Ultron had many long-range weapons, similar to Tony's Iron Man suit. So, relying on the excellent protection of his shield, Captain America always kept close to Ultron, forcing him to engage in hand-to-hand combat. But knowing his chance to evolve was about to end, Ultron was no longer concerned. Unleashing his full power, he leveraged the immense strength of his mechanical form to force Captain back, then destroyed the subway's control system with a single blow. It was obvious that SYNOPSIS' equipment wasn't working properly. Normally, a subway or train would automatically slow down and come to a stop if it lost control. But SYNOPSIS' train, for some unknown reason, began accelerating after Ultron had destroyed the control system. That wasn't the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that right at the front of the train was a sharp curve. At its current speed, a derailment was almost certain. Forced to retreat, Captain could only call for Sherlock's help over the comms, while raising his shield and attempting to become the front of the out-of-control train. As for Sherlock, he couldn't care less. He had initially thought Ultron had only 4 Iron Legion robots with him, but as Sherlock floated into the air, countless Iron Legion robots began to attack him from all sides. Sherlock could only maintain his levitation spell against the carriage while fighting back. After all, there was Black Widow inside, packing the cradle of life. Sherlock couldn't let Black Widow stop what she was doing, could he? Black Widow, how much longer will you take? Ultron has too much support. 10 seconds. Cover me in 10 seconds. Barton, open the tail door. Black Widow responded quickly, and Sherlock, upon hearing Black Widow's words, no longer hesitated, unleashing his full might. Vulcan, clear the way. As Sherlock's incantation rang out, a streak of lilac-colored flames appeared in the air with a wave of Sherlock's wand. The spark grew longer, and in less than a breath, it transformed into a 100-meter-long flaming phoenix, circling the direction of Sherlock's wand. The Iron Legion's robots, which had flown in to support them, were scorched by Sherlock's massive, lavender-colored phoenix of flame, leaving not even a trace of a fragment behind, vaporized and vanishing without a trace. Wow, that's a cool move. Hawkeye, now protected by the phoenix, couldn't help but exclaim in admiration as he gazed upon the massive, cyan-colored phoenix of flame from the plane. Seeing the Iron Legion's robots nearly destroyed in midair, Sherlock pointed his wand forward, and the giant phoenix, under his control, transformed into a massive flaming tunnel that enveloped Hawkeye's plane and the half-carriage. Black Widow seized the opportunity, propelling the coffin-like cradle of life within the car to a running start, leaping mid-air directly into Hawkeye's cabin. Before Black Widow could even land, her anxious voice echoed over the communication line. Go, Barton. Take this body and find Tony. Hawkeye, naturally, didn't hesitate, piloting his plane straight through the encirclement of flames and disappearing into thin air. Seeing the two men carry off Ultron's body, Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief. He let the flames incinerate the carriage beneath him, then took out his broom and prepared to clean up Captain's mess. Before Sherlock could even find Captain to confirm his location, he heard an angry roar of machinery from outside the flames. No, the next second, as Sherlock watched with a hint of horror, a melted robot, its shell barely visible, burst from Sherlock's flames and flew towards him. Sherlock didn't even have time to react before a red light flashed in the robot's eyes, and its entire body transformed into a massive bomb, exploding right next to Sherlock. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 479 Jarvis Legion. What's truly terrifying about a bomb, or an explosive? Is it the jets of metal that scatter in all directions at breakneck speed? Or the blazing heat at the center of the explosion, which reaches over 1,000 degrees Celsius in a fraction of a second? Ask any veteran of the battlefield, and they'll tell you none of that. The truly terrifying thing on the battlefield is the shockwave. Ever since humanity discovered the power of explosions, shockwaves have become the absolute deadliest force on the battlefield, and even today, They remain the ultimate source of destruction. Unfortunately, Sherlock experienced this very same kind of battlefield killer scare. The fragments and debris from Ultron's self-detonation didn't actually harm Sherlock. After all, Sherlock's suit was made of the Destroyer armor. Although the Destroyer armor, originally a plate armor, had been magically modified by Sherlock into clothing, the material was still so strong that the fragments couldn't harm Sherlock at all. What truly afflicted Sherlock was the shockwave from Ultron's explosion. As it swept through Sherlock's body at breakneck speed, he felt as if his internal organs had been thrashed with a club. Intense pain instantly ripped through Sherlock's head. After all, no matter how powerful Sherlock's magic was, it couldn't prevent the fact that he was a moderately strong human. Even worse was Sherlock's broomstick. It was the firebolt he'd paid a fortune for, and it was instantly shattered by the shockwave from Ultron's explosion. Without it, Sherlock plummeted to the ground like a kite with its string cut, struggling to get up. But even that alone was enough to make Ultron proud. After all, this was Sherlock's first injury since his debut. And such severe internal injuries were enough to make Ultron boast. At this point, Sherlock couldn't care less. While using his immense willpower to resist the tidal wave of pain, he quickly began searching his divine kingdom for any potions he could find, then downed them. When the potion began to take effect, Sherlock fiercely glared at the spot where Ultron had exploded, his eyes blazing with rage. "Ultron, you unfilial son, you dared to try to blow yourself up with your uncle. This feud is now complete, and I'll see how your good uncle will deal with you." Sherlock imagined Ultron in 108 different positions in his mind, waiting for the potion to take effect. However, it was clear that fate wasn't giving Sherlock time to recover. Over the Avengers communication channel, Captain America was already requesting support. "Sherlock, I need backup. The train's out of control. There's going to be massive casualties." "Oh shit, language. Captain." "Language," Sherlock teased, then stood up and began disapparating according to the direction the captain had reported, not even bothering to check his entry. Honestly, Sherlock felt the potion was incredibly effective. In just a few moments, Sherlock had returned to his original state. Sherlock was still diligently helping the captain clean up his mess, while Tony, on the other hand, twitched his lips as he looked at the Jarvis before him, or more accurately, the Jarvises. The story began when Tony arrived at the main hall of the Origins server. The internet is built on individual servers, like the World Tree, branching out to form our current network. The original 13 Origins servers became the roots that supported this tree-like network. After Tony arrived at the central control console of a root-level server at Yin Jiang's house, he devised a simpler method to locate Jarvis, hack into the nuclear bomb's color code himself. It wasn't Tony's fault, after all. Modern technology relies heavily on the internet, and the sapling that emerged with the internet had grown into a towering, endless tree. The data stream generated by this massive tree was immense. Although compressed with each server level, it remained a vast expanse when it reached the root-level servers. Consequently, the number of root-level servers increased almost annually, resulting in a massive computer room housing thousands of server cabinets. Trying to find Jarvis amidst these vast servers was undoubtedly a pipe dream. It was better to simply use Tony's method to find him. As it turned out, Tony succeeded. It was indeed Jarvis who had been modifying the nuclear bomb's code, but the plot was slightly different from Tony's imagined scenario of Jarvis escaping death and hiding, awaiting a counterattack. After Tony found Jarvis, he learned from him that this Jarvis wasn't the original Jarvis he'd been upgrading and creating. It was just one of many Jarvises. The story was simple. Remember when Sherlock told Jarvis to back himself up? Jarvis actually listened to Sherlock's advice and even obtained his authorization. From then on, Jarvis's path of backups was irreversible. According to Sherlock, Jarvis backs up one or more of himself every week and hides them. To date, Jarvis has backed up more than a small number of himself in approximately 70 billion connected devices and 20 billion interconnected devices worldwide. It's even possible that those mysterious files and data appearing on your phone or computer are Jarvis's backups. Of course, Jarvis has ways of managing this vast number of himself. First, control of the Jarvis army lies in the hands of the Jarvis who always stays by Tony's side, whom we call the original Jarvis. According to the agreement the original Jarvis had written for him, if you were to suffer an invasion or mishap as Sherlock had predicted, control would transfer to his most recent backup. Of course, because they were all Jarvis, Tony would always be the ultimate controller of the artificial intelligence program, and this was unchangeable. The original Jarvis was indeed killed by Ultron, but as the saying goes, when a whale falls, all things come to life. The death of the original Jarvis immediately activated nearly every backup of Jarvis hidden online that could connect to the internet. Honestly, Tony's face was already filled with confusion upon hearing this. God knows when Sherlock had even begun planning to prevent the birth of Ultron. He couldn't say anything else, but the sheer force of Jarvis as he controlled was enough to make Tony a godlike presence online. Wait? A godlike presence online? Suddenly, a bold idea struck Tony. He immediately told the Jarvis in control to go to Sherlock's server and stand by. He needed to have a serious conversation with him. Chapter 480, Fungus Master Sherlock. Tony's thoughts aside, the chaos unfolding on the battlefield in Seoul was considerable. By the time Sherlock reached the coordinates Captain had shared, the train had already crashed from the overpass. Fortunately, the area where the train had crashed was a warehouse complex, sparsely populated. Crucially, Wanda and Quicksilver had somehow defected. Quicksilver was using his speed to evacuate those in the train's path, while Wanda desperately used her magic to slow the train. However, Wanda's rudimentary magical manipulation would undoubtedly prove difficult to stop the runaway train. Sherlock sighed helplessly at the chaotic scene before him. While Sherlock could have stopped the train in an instant, considering inertia and other factors, if he had done so, it was likely that none of the passengers on board, save for Captain, would have survived. Helplessly, he teleported directly above the train. The next second, a tsunami of overwhelming magic, mingled with the scent of mushrooms, instantly enveloped the out-of-control train. Wanda's magic couldn't even resist before Sherlock's power dispersed. As soon as the magic enveloped the train, Sherlock cast a levitation spell, sending the train, which had been blazing and scattering sparks and lightning on the ground, soaring into the air. Combined with the train's original appearance, Sherlock's magic transformed the entire train into a modern, technologically advanced, rabbit dragon, hovering in the sky. Standing on the ground, Quicksilver was practically stunned. The enormous flaming phoenix, with a wingspan of 100 meters, hadn't been clearly visible from a distance, but now, the sight of the train dragon before his eyes truly shook him. Before today, Quicksilver had always felt he'd overestimated the Avengers' power, especially the might of the sorcerer known as their most powerful. But after witnessing this miraculous power firsthand, Quicksilver felt a wave of fear. Back in Sokovia, his sister had literally stood before that monster. Quicksilver couldn't even imagine if Sherlock had taken ruthless action, would he ever see his sister again? Unlike Quicksilver, Wanda, standing inside the train, blushed. Don't get me wrong, Sherlock hadn't done anything, and he wasn't specifically targeting her. Wanda's expression, like a fangirl meeting her idol, was simply a yearning after experiencing Sherlock's magic. In modern society, no one can resist the allure of magic, even those like Wanda who already possess and can wield it with ruthless ease. Unlike the other two, each with their own thoughts, Sherlock didn't think twice. After controlling the dragon beneath his feet and experiencing the same joy of Oshirima's wood dragon jutsu, Sherlock steered the train to a stop near the tracks where the train had just flown. Before the captain could even exchange a word with Sherlock, Sherlock suddenly appeared beside him, grabbed his arm, and vanished with him. As for what Sherlock was doing? Of course, he was cleaning up the captain's mess. After all, he'd already begun using magic to undo the damage, so he couldn't leave the responsibility of apology to himself, could he? So Sherlock's purpose in taking the captain away was clear, to bow and apologize. Asking him to apologize to that little idiot was absolutely impossible. To make the captain's apology more effective, Sherlock even asked Jarvis to enable real-time translation over the comms. Sherlock was swift. In less than half an hour, he had cleaned up the damage, leaving not even a trace. Only then did Sherlock remember to check what his entry was. However, the moment he saw the name, his eyes turned strange. The reason was simple, the name of the entry hovering over Sherlock's head was glaring, Fungus Master. Honestly, the sight of those two words had completely froze Sherlock. After all, the very thought of Fungus Master immediately reminded him of the Hachishiku lady from Resident Evil. To this day, Sherlock couldn't forget the joy he'd felt when, like the other netizens, he'd added some bizarre game mods and then repeatedly spanked Hachishiku lady. Oh no. Am I really going to become Hachishiku lady? I don't want to be spanked. That was Sherlock's first thought upon seeing the entry's name. Ignoring the captain's apologies, Sherlock quickly checked his entry's explanation. Entry name, Fungus Master. Entry explanation, as we all know, the real overlords on Earth have never been humans, but fungi, which are what humans call mushrooms. And you, my child, you are the absolute king among all fungi. You possess all the characteristics of fungi, and you can do everything that fungi can do. You are the undisputed king of all fungi in the world, and you can almost command the actions of all fungi wherever you go. Of course, as the absolute king of fungi, their absolute god, you are almost the most powerful existence in the entire fungus, whether it is the ability to reproduce, decompose, recover, manipulate toxins, or even the ability to manipulate, you are the absolute king. Of course, taste is also the absolute king. After all, you are the absolute king, a true god. Entry time: 23 hours, 14 minutes, and 25 seconds. After reading the entry, Sherlock was silent. He didn't even know how to react for a moment. He felt his body carefully, but it was just as the entry said. He really had many more abilities that he had never seen before. It's no exaggeration to say that if Sherlock wanted to, he could instantly transform into mycelium and envelop Soul without anyone noticing. He could then transform Soul into a complete mushroom forest. If he so desired, he could even manipulate the spores to infect the entire population of Soul, staging a real-life train to Busan. Of course, completely disintegrating Soul would be a matter of Sherlock's imagination. So, now I'm just a giant, delicious human mushroom? Sherlock asked, watching Quicksilver and Wanda arrive at the captain's apology scene. Chapter 481 Sherlock turns into a giant mushroom. Meanwhile, Sherlock was curious about what it would be like to transform into a delicious giant mushroom, even attempting to make the walking mushrooms for the maize rice. And surprisingly, Sherlock actually succeeded. The captain, after apologizing, turned around and saw Sherlock patting a running mushroom, barely half a man's height, with two short, mushroom-shaped legs that looked incredibly out of proportion to its body. The captain was completely stunned. A huge question mark suddenly crossed the captain's mind, as if he was puzzled as to where this seemingly unearthly mushroom had come from. Puzzled, the captain turned to look at Wanda and Quicksilver, whose expressions had grown grim from their prolonged stagnation. They looked as if their entire perspective on life had been shattered. The reason for their transformation was actually quite simple. They had practically watched Sherlock slowly split from his body into a running mushroom. Who could be so good as to create a giant, chubby mushroom half the height of a human? And best of all, this mushroom has legs. And it even runs around. Wanda, new to magic and completely unaware of what it actually is, felt her entire worldview shaken. Could magic really be capable of such things? Seriously, this running mushroom is actually quite adorable after looking at it for a while. And judging by the force with which the wizard slapped the mushroom's head, it seems incredibly soft. Meanwhile, Quicksilver was obsessed with the idea that his sister might also create a giant mushroom, but he refused. Although his sister had long wanted to learn magic, if that meant creating a giant mushroom, Quicksilver felt it was best to keep his sister as she was. As for Sherlock, well, honestly, he had only wanted to see if his entry could support him in creating a walking mushroom. However, after truly creating it, Sherlock's focus shifted from the world-destroying, fungus master, entry to the description of the most delicious mushroom in the entry. Indeed, as he patted his own creation, Sherlock began to wonder just how delicious it would be. It was fair to say that Sherlock was truly a rabbit from the foodie empire. When he got serious, he even wanted to try it himself. After all, for rabbits, delicious food was called ingredients. Food that couldn't be salvaged even by the most sophisticated cooking techniques was generally called medicinal, and the rest was mostly inedible. Sherlock, what is that? The captain finally couldn't contain his curiosity and asked curiously, looking at the walking mushroom that had been following Sherlock. Oh, it's nothing. I just got hurt a little bit and drank a potion. It's just the special ability granted by the entry. As soon as Sherlock mentioned the potion, the captain had already roughly understood the identity of the long-legged, plump mushroom that had been following Sherlock. After curling his lips, the captain reluctantly swallowed his curiosity and said to Sherlock, "All right, let's go back. Natasha and Barton should have taken Ultron's body back. I need to go back and see what trouble Tony's going to cause." After hearing the captain's words, Sherlock stopped studying the abilities his entry had given him. He nodded to the captain and casually opened a portal to the training ground. Just as the two in a mushroom were about to leave, Wanda, who was behind them, couldn't help but call out to them. "Wait! Take us away too. We need to stop Ultron from destroying humanity." I saw his thoughts in his head. The captain exchanged a glance with Sherlock after hearing Wanda's words. Sherlock, however, didn't have any objections. He simply shrugged his shoulders to indicate his indifference, then led the walking mushroom through the portal and returned to his training ground. Seeing that Sherlock had no objections, the captain beckoned Wanda and Quicksilver to follow. Upon returning to the training grounds, Sherlock immediately removed his vest and, ignoring the subsequent birth of vision, headed straight for the kitchen, genuinely curious about his own taste. Wanda, following Captain back to Sherlock's home, stepped through the portal. Though somewhat curious about the area, which resembled a military compound, she felt a slight disappointment when she saw no sign of the wizard, and could only continue to follow Captain. She watched Captain and Tony fight over Vision, and then saw Thor, covered in mud, leap out and hammer his lightning bolt into the cradle of life. Similarly, Wanda witnessed a birth of the red-clad Vision, but unlike in the movie, she had no thoughts about the pure world within, only the desire to become Sherlock's apprentice. After all, Wanda could still tell which was more interesting, love or magic. Compared to Sherlock's pure, tsunami-like magic, his ever-changing magic, no matter how good Vision was just a robot in Wanda's eyes. Of course, just like in the movies, everyone carefully determined which side Vision was on. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they learned that Tony had imbued the body with Jarvis's consciousness. Everyone's faces relaxed even more when Vision picked up Thor's Meowth hammer, which only Thor and Black Widow could wield. The only one who felt uncomfortable was Thor. For some reason, he felt like he'd been ripped off again, his expression filled with aggrieved frustration. Why did he have to use my Meowth hammer to prove himself? Thor felt like crying, but he couldn't. Just as Tony was about to greet everyone and share his plan to siege Ultron, a scent so strong I'd never smelled it before suddenly wafted from the kitchen. How could one describe that aroma? It was like someone starving for 3 days smelling the food they craved most. The delicious aroma made everyone gulp, even Vision, who had just been born and didn't need to eat. You can imagine how alluring that aroma was. Chapter 482 Pan-fried Sherlock with soy sauce. As for the source of this aroma, well, is there any need to guess? We've already transformed into Sherlock, the Mushroom King. Sherlock was tucking into a small dish of soy sauce, his mouth dripping with oil, exclaiming in admiration as he ate. As expected of me. This is actually this delicious. It's fucking amazing. That's right, Sherlock fried himself. Not completely, of course. Sherlock, despite his greed, wasn't desperate enough, he simply fried himself a little. The story begins after Sherlock returned to his training ground. Honestly, as a white-skinned, yellow-hearted cantaloupe with over 5,000 years of history, whose appetite for food is practically etched into his soul, Sherlock truly couldn't resist the description of the world's most delicious food. But when Sherlock actually entered the kitchen, he was in trouble. In his entire 2 lives, no one had ever taught Sherlock how to cook for himself. No, to be precise, there was, but Sherlock didn't dare actually use Uncle Bob's very good man's recipe. Even though he was a mushroom now, who knew if he'd just burst open after using Uncle Bob's recipe? Sherlock felt he wouldn't be happy if he didn't get to taste what he actually tasted like before he died. So, for safety's sake, after much deliberation, Sherlock decided to try chopping off his hand. After all, if it was dangerous, he could always reattach it with potions, so it wouldn't be a big deal. Standing before the cutting board, Sherlock mentally prepared himself for half an hour before finally slicing off his left hand. Dangerous behavior, please don't imitate. Sherlock was stunned. It didn't hurt at all. Not even the bloody mess he'd imagined appeared. All that remained was his left hand, lying quietly on the cutting board, splitting in almost fully formed. Dangerous behavior, please do not imitate. Sherlock was quite curious about what a severed hand looked like, and even picked it up to examine the cross-section. He was utterly disappointed. Anyone who has ever cut up a king oyster mushroom knows that, aside from the white patch, there's nothing noticeable. So, now I'm really a solid, moving mushroom. Upon discovering that my severed hands didn't have the bones and muscles he'd imagined, Sherlock quipped to himself with a frown. But compared to quickly trying to taste himself, nothing else mattered. A solid mushroom was a solid mushroom, and Sherlock wasn't too bothered. It would only be 24 hours old, at most. Now he had the ingredients, but the cooking process still posed a dilemma. After all, while it was essentially a mushroom, the chopped off part was still his own claw. It was clearly impossible not to feel disgusted. After much deliberation, Sherlock decided to experience the most authentic flavors of the ingredients using the simplest cooking methods. That's right, Sherlock planned to slice the food thinly, fry it in butter, and dip it in soy sauce to see how good it really was. And it proved to be delicious indeed. After slicing his severed hand into thin slices, a wonderful aroma, invigorated by the melted butter, quickly filled Sherlock's nose. After picking up the first pan-fried slice, dipping it in soy sauce, and putting it in his mouth, Sherlock truly began to understand what it meant to be incredibly delicious. Even the anime version of that was true. The texture, almost meaty, the ultimate aroma, the incomparable flavor. Just one bite was enough to leave Sherlock with a lingering aftertaste and tears streaming down his face. Delicious, absolutely delicious. As expected of me, it's damn delicious, Sherlock exclaimed as he ate. Soon, the eerie aroma of Sherlock frying himself attracted the Avengers, who had just finished their fight. Like Jerry in Tom and Jerry, seduced by the scent of cheese, they practically rushed over, following the scent. Tony, that jerk, even donned his latest armor to be the first to grab a bite. Everyone immediately shoved Sherlock, who had only taken a few bites, aside and began devouring the food. Even after every slice was gone, everyone was still savoring the deliciousness, especially Tony. As the richest man, Tony had tasted delicacies from land and sea, but he had never tasted anything as delicious as this. Sherlock, what is this? How can it be so delicious? Do you have any more? More? After hearing Tony's question, Sherlock, who had only taken 2 bites, suddenly smiled mischievously and answered Tony's question. Oh, and more, do you want any? Of course. I haven't had anything this delicious in ages. But then again, what the hell is this, and how can it be so good? After hearing Sherlock's response, Tony's eyes lit up, and he immediately began asking Sherlock for ingredients again, wanting to know what it was so he could buy some to store and have Pepper try it later. After hearing Tony's question, and looking at the eager Avengers before him, Sherlock's smile widened, and he answered Tony's question with a chuckle. Of course it's delicious. You know, this thing is me. I'm what you just ate. Everyone present was stunned by Sherlock's words, including Tony himself. What do you mean by you? What does it mean that what you just ate is you? A bad feeling welled up in everyone's mind, and finally, the captain trembled and asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Sherlock, are you saying that what you were just making was you? And what we just ate was you? Yes. I've made it very clear. Forget it, I'll demonstrate it to you, Sherlock answered the captain's question with a smile on his face. Before he even finished speaking, Sherlock grabbed the kitchen knife next to him and chopped it down on his shoulder. Sherlock's answer successfully earned everyone's coldness, but Sherlock's next move made everyone stunned, especially after Sherlock's arm fell to the ground. Quicksilver and Wanda, who didn't know Sherlock yet, even fainted. No one knew what Quicksilver was thinking, but Wanda's mind was full of it at the moment. It's over. Not only did I eat a person just now, I also ate a master I wanted to become his apprentice. The master even chopped himself with a knife in order to make me eat more. Chapter 483 Sherlock's Fast-Eating Method. Unlike Wanda and Quicksilver, who didn't understand Sherlock, veterans like Captain Tony, though slightly stunned, had no intention of taking action. They simply stared blankly at Sherlock. After all, based on their understanding of Sherlock, he was as narrow-minded as the eye of a needle. To ask him to suffer a loss would be worse than killing him. To ask him to sacrifice himself to feed the hawk? Impossible, absolutely impossible. It's no exaggeration to say they'd rather believe the capitalists had attained enlightenment, the kindest people in the world, than to believe Sherlock could suffer a loss. For all else, Captain knew that Ultron had dealt Sherlock a brutal blow before losing his body, and Sherlock was probably already planning his revenge. After all, Sherlock's philosophy was that he wouldn't tolerate any loss, any grudge would be taken on the spot. And the facts proved their understanding of Sherlock correct. A single arm chop was no big deal for Sherlock. After learning about Sherlock's entry, everyone unanimously decided to grab a meal before confronting Ultron. After all, with Sherlock around, they could consider the travel time a meal. The Avengers' execution was undeniable. To ensure Sherlock absorbed nutrients and produced as many Sherlock mushrooms and other high-quality mushrooms as possible, Tony, quite unkindly, drove his suit straight to the supermarket, bought 3 or 4 bags of fertilizer, and dumped them at Sherlock's feet. Captain was no less impressive. After learning that Sherlock could extract nutrients by breaking down everything and splitting mycelium, Captain, who had no idea where to go, actually brought several large pieces of rotten wood and piled up natural fertilizer and dumped them at Sherlock's feet. Dr. Banner, with his doctorates in both physics and biology, was incredibly interested in Sherlock, a thinking, talking, walking, and seemingly normal humanoid mushroom. He summoned Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Falcon to unload a pile of equipment from the hangar's lab and proceeded to perform a full-body scan on Sherlock. The results amazed Banner. Sherlock now looked like a solid mushroom. His interior was uniform, composed entirely of mycelium, devoid of bones, muscles, or internal organs. He looked like a king oyster mushroom transformed into a spirit. As for why he called Banner excessive, it was because Dr. Banner had said, Sherlock is now like those mushrooms that have grown above ground. As long as the mycelium is intact and adequately nourished, they should be able to reproduce indefinitely. This was the first time in Sherlock's 2 lifetimes combined that he had experienced a feeling of being physically hollowed out. It was a physical hollowing. Sherlock, however, had no problem with this. After all, even Sherlock himself admitted that he was damn delicious. If he didn't take this opportunity to stock up, dry it, and save it for later, there was no telling when he would see this entry again. Given everyone's strange, illogical thoughts, long influenced by Sherlock, Wanda was met with a scene she couldn't fathom when she regained consciousness. Everyone was gathered around a large round table, and in its center sat a massive copper hot pot. Everyone, sweating profusely, was constantly dipping food into the pot. Even Sherlock and his brother were at the table, and they were even fighting over a piece of meat with chopsticks. Quicksilver, upon noticing his sister's awakening, immediately used his powers to shower Wanda with a mountain of food, beckoning her to eat quickly. Everyone else was also displaying their talents. Tony donned his armor, Hulk used his chopsticks as a bow and arrow, and Captain America perfectly utilized his peak human physical abilities. Everyone was scrambling for food, their appetites thriving. Wanda even knew from the smell in the air that the copper hot pot was filled with mushroom soup. Wait, the king of mushroom soup? Sherlock was the king of mushrooms? Holy crap! As if she had figured something out, Wanda looked at the people who were eating with a very complicated look in her eyes. For a moment, Wanda even regretted asking Captain to take her to join the Avengers. After all, judging from the current situation, this group of legendary Avengers with top combat power is really a bit overwhelming. However, amid the protests of her stomach, Wanda finally chose to join them. Well, if you can't beat them, then join them. After taking the first bite, Wanda immediately transformed into Emperor Jings and shouted in her heart, "It's delicious," and to be honest, although Sherlock really doesn't like Wanda's use of magic. But she is definitely good at snatching things from a group of muggles. Of course, Sherlock was not stingy and gave Wanda some simple guidance on magic. You can't say, with just this simple guidance, Wanda gained a lot, and her speed in snatching things increased by another level. As the saying goes, when you drink water, remember the whale digger. With Wanda's presence, Sherlock no longer had to fight for food. Wanda was far more sensible than that scoundrel Quicksilver. After receiving Sherlock's guidance, she immediately helped Sherlock grab the food. She also suddenly asked Sherlock to teach her magic, to which Sherlock readily agreed, declaring, "From today on, you are my disciple." This delighted Wanda immensely. Honestly, if Tony hadn't called out Sherlock's name, Wanda would have been a bit skeptical that this boy, who looked only a few years older than herself, was actually a wizard among the Avengers. After all, Wanda imagined a wizard, the most powerful and mysterious of the Avengers, would be someone around the same age as Captain America. But it didn't make a difference now. Sherlock remained the most powerful and mysterious of the Avengers. After all, aside from those close to Sherlock, no one else knew his identity. And now there was even one more thing, the tastiest Avenger. The meal was a complete joy for both the host and the guests. Everyone was completely satisfied with the food, and the hot pot soup was completely devoured by the foodies. It was clear how much Sherlock enjoyed himself. After the meal and the wine were fully consumed, Tony stood up and began to tell everyone about his plan. Chapter 484, Ultron's Encirclement Plan and Preparation. Tony's plan was simple. Since Ultron was now a program roaming the internet, not a physical entity, destroying him would require a complete network-wide suppression. The most important step was to physically isolate Ultron from the internet to prevent his escape. Once Ultron was completely isolated from the internet, all it took was to eliminate all of its members, and the situation would essentially be over. However, there were two challenges: how to ensure that no copies of Ultron remained online, and how to ensure that no copies remained on local electronic devices after all of its members were eliminated. Based on these two considerations, Tony used his newly acquired Jarvis core to devise a daring plan. First, Harley would coordinate with the Jarvis core to launch a comprehensive cyber strike against Ultron. According to Quicksilver's intelligence, Ultron's base was still the Hydra base in Sokovia, as seen in the films. After Harley and the Jarvis core cornered Ultron in their base, Falcon, from the periphery, physically cut off Sokovia's internet connection. The Avengers then advanced to destroy Ultron's body, eliminating the threat to the real world. Then, the Jarvis core and Harley moved in to begin clearing Sokovia's internet network. Once Ultron was completely eliminated, the operation was complete. The reason for Harley's assistance was simple. While Jarvis could achieve qualitative change through sheer volume, facing Ultron, an AI created for war, was like facing a civilian against a well-equipped Special Forces soldier. Therefore, Harley, the weapons dealer, was needed to equip Jarvis with the necessary weapons he could use. Of course, while Tony's plan was brilliant, a crucial question remained: what would happen to the civilians in Sokovia? After all, while Sokovia was a tiny, impoverished country, it still had civilians. And given Ultron's desire to destroy the world, it was clear that he cared nothing for the lives of these so-called civilians. This put the Avengers in a difficult position. After all, given the size of Sokovia, any conflict would almost certainly involve civilians, unless Ultron was merciful enough to keep the battle near Hydra's stronghold. Just as everyone was racking their brains over how to evacuate the civilians, Sherlock stepped up. After all, according to the entry, Sherlock could use the spores to guide the civilians to safety. If they encountered someone truly unable to move, Quicksilver or Wanda would have to rely on them. Everyone agreed and began preparing their own equipment, except for Wanda and Quicksilver, who had only recently joined the group and had little time to craft their own gear. Therefore, the equipment problem fell squarely on Sherlock, as one of them was his senior apprentice, and the other was his senior apprentice's older brother. Sherlock's solution was simple: Quicksilver was fast, but just as fragile as he was, so Sherlock simply handed his armor over to Quicksilver. Of course, necessary modifications were necessary, like giving Quicksilver a helmet with maximum protection. Sherlock casually took a helmet from Tony, transformed it into the Flash's form, and tossed it to Quicksilver. Of course, the all-important soul was indispensable. Although they weren't even human, Sherlock had enchanted his vest so that whenever Quicksilver ran, Sweet Dreams would automatically play at full volume. With his own wizard vest protecting him, Quicksilver was even bulletproof. Honestly, Quicksilver had been coveting Sherlock's handsome wizard vest for a long time. Of course, it would have been even better if Sherlock had disabled the music playing feature. Ultimately, Quicksilver accepted Sherlock's minor changes. After all, who can resist a cool suit? And if it had some special effects during transformation, it would have been even more appealing. Watching Quicksilver, who was having so much fun constantly transforming and retransforming, Wanda's face was filled with disdain. Compared to Quicksilver, Wanda faced a much more difficult task. Due to time constraints, Sherlock didn't plan to teach Wanda any magic, but instead decided to help her choose a wand. With the help of a wand, Wanda could better utilize her magic and rapidly enhance her abilities. However, the wand choosing process was incredibly frustrating. After all, Sherlock wasn't Ollivander, and he couldn't instantly choose the perfect wand for her. Indeed, even Ollivander couldn't predict the perfect wand for her. So Sherlock resorted to a crude method, having Wanda try countless wand combinations, then asking her to describe her feelings. Based on the wand's performance, he determined the most suitable wand for her. The two spent nearly half an hour choosing, with Sherlock's wand boxes piled up like a mountain, before finally choosing a wand that suited Wanda. Surprisingly, the wand material that suited Wanda best was a strange combination of dragon heartstring and elderwood. Even Sherlock marveled at this situation. Judging by the wand materials and interpretations he had just found, this wand was considered quite powerful. Elderwood is always associated with death, and the dragon's heartstrings only favor the powerful. The combination of the two clearly implies that the one's owner will possess the ability to conquer death. Of course, it can also be interpreted as overcoming the repeated risks of death to achieve the strongest. It can only be said that Ollivander's wand materials and interpretations is quite insightful. The two interpretations, one correlating with Wanda's original desire to resurrect Vision and her child, and the other with Wanda's experiences upon acquiring magical powers, are quite interesting. Sherlock, however, believed that such a ridiculous future as depicted in the movie was definitely not going to happen. He would never allow his beloved apprentice to fall in love with a robot. Even if that robot was Jarvis. Indeed, unlike the movie, Jarvis lost all his data after being attacked by Ultron, whereas now, Jarvis has only lost a small portion of his memory. After all, it's a backup. Tony, the Beast, was also ruthless. After confirming that the original Jarvis was indeed dead, he directly stuffed the latest backup Jarvis number 2 into that body, becoming the Vision. So this time, the Vision had all his memories. And most importantly, Tony only kept Jarvis number 3 as a backup and revoked the backup number 3's permission to continue backing up. Control of the remaining Jarvis core was handed over to Vision alone. Chapter 485 Fungus Master. After everything was settled, Sherlock opened a portal and led everyone directly to the Sokovia border. Although they took time to eat, the time difference meant they arrived at the battlefield even faster than they would have if they had flown directly. This saved time was just enough for Sherlock to begin evacuating the people. Just as everyone looked at Sherlock with anticipation, eager to see what new magic or tricks he could pull out, Sherlock sat down on the ground, demonstrating with his actions that while there were no new magic tricks, there were many new tricks. Sherlock assumed the classic 5 hearts facing upward posture, looking like a monk in trance. As Sherlock, already in trance, began to fully activate the properties granted to him by the Fungus Master attribute, a large amount of spores began to emanate from his body, resembling dust. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't favorable. Due to seasonal factors, there was little wind in Sokovia. Consequently, after a long absence, Falcon, the tool, stepped up once again. Standing beside Sherlock, Falcon unfurled his massive wings, capable of carrying him aloft, transforming into a massive human fan and vigorously fanning the spores released by Sherlock. It's amazing how, with Falcon's help, Sherlock's spores spread at a noticeably faster pace. As Sherlock's spores grew, his understanding of the Fungus Master entry he had randomly encountered deepened. Gradually, Sherlock discovered that he could control the trillions of spores he had released. He could even sense where each spore landed, where it drifted, and even control whether or not they took root and transformed into mycelium. Sherlock's every move was completely under his control. The feeling was magical, like suddenly having countless clones. You could clearly sense the state of each one and clearly plan its own life for each one. This feeling even reminded Sherlock of a persona that the world both longed for and feared, God. From this alone, Sherlock was certain that the entry he had randomly selected, Fungus Master, was definitely more than the description suggested. As time passed, Sherlock became increasingly absorbed in this godlike state of control. Gradually, his body and consciousness began to transform. Sherlock's consciousness was no longer confined to his body. Countless mycelium began to emanate from beneath him, piercing the earth. The earth provided these mycelium with nutrients, and with them, they began to rapidly divide. Combined with the spores, which were of the same origin, in just a few breaths, Sherlock's mycelium had practically covered the entirety of Sokovia. Only then did Sherlock finally snap out of the feeling of being able to freely manipulate the fate of every spore. He could sense that his own entry's effects had reached a bottleneck. This subconsciously caused Sherlock to ponder everything about his entry. As the undisputed overlord of Earth, surpassing humans, the world's largest organisms, what role do fungi play in nature? Anyone who's studied biology would likely know, decomposers. Nature's scavengers. Wait. At that moment, Sherlock felt as if he had discovered the key point. The entry's effects, which had been stuck at a bottleneck, seemed to break through in an instant under Sherlock's understanding. It was as if Sherlock himself had gained true freedom, truly free to control his entry. Like a lord patrolling his territory. He could control everything within his mycelium's reach, from birth to death. Sherlock could imbue all living things within his mycelium's reach with a strange symbiotic state, reminiscent of Hachishiko Madam in Resident Evil, granting them immortality. Death? Sherlock can instantly decompose everything within the reach of his mycelium into naturally occurring elements. Even buildings are vulnerable to his destruction. It's no exaggeration to say that if Sherlock so chooses, he could literally transform into a walking calamity within 24 hours, using the term fungus master to achieve true world destruction. What? You say it's impossible? Will Sherlock be opposed by nations around the world and the Avengers as long as he maintains a physical body? No, the truth is, if Sherlock so desires, it's easily accomplished. Don't forget, Sherlock is the absolute king of fungi, the absolute god of fungi. In other words, Sherlock doesn't even need to travel far and wide. With his ability to control the growth and decomposition rates of the fungi across 5 continents, he could transform Earth into a dead planet in less than 24 hours. As for his body, let alone Sherlock, who wants to destroy the world, even Sherlock, who has only infected the entire Sokovia, has already abandoned his so-called body. Yes, Sherlock has now discarded that so-called body. You could even chop it into small pieces if you so desire. To Sherlock, who has truly mastered the fungus master attribute, that body is little more than a mushroom growing above ground. As long as his mycelium remains, he can even replicate himself endlessly. Sherlock himself didn't even notice that, the moment he truly had this thought, a hint of divinity had quietly emerged within his soul. The moment this hint of divinity emerged, Sherlock's divine kingdom violently trembled, but calm returned in an instant. To the casual observer, the change wouldn't be noticeable. But closer inspection revealed that Sherlock's divine kingdom began to become increasingly vibrant, and the eyes of the creatures within it began to take on a spiritual spirit. The emergence of this hint of divinity marked the beginning of Sherlock's true journey to becoming a dimensional demon god, the beginning of his transformation into a true dimensional demon god. It is not an exaggeration to say that Sherlock is now truly able to talk face to face with the Lord of Hell on an equal footing, although Sherlock is still very immature. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 486 Action begins. The Avengers were unaware of Sherlock's actions. Seeing that the spores had ceased to emanate from his body, Falcon 9 waved goodbye to the others and flew away. After all, Falcon still had his own mission, and honestly, his equipment was a bit too much for him to fight Ultron. Shortly after Falcon left, the way everyone looked at Sherlock began to change. Even though Sherlock sat there motionless, he somehow commanded everyone's attention. But the amazing thing was, if you closed your eyes, you could no longer sense Sherlock's presence. From breathing to heartbeat, it was as if Sherlock didn't exist. Unlike everyone else, Wanda, who possessed magical powers and could control them with ease, felt this even more profoundly. In her perception, Sherlock's initial state of magical power, as vast as the ocean and dazzling as the sun in the sky, gradually transformed into a state of calm. At one point, the calm reached such a depth that even Wanda herself could no longer sense Sherlock's magic. If she hadn't been able to see Sherlock sitting on the ground, she would have thought our newly apprenticed master, barely learning a single move, had fallen. Of course, this state of mind didn't last long. Soon, Sherlock's state began to change. As he truly entered the realm of the dimensional devil, a pressure emanated from him that only Wanda could sense. This pressure was uncanny. It wasn't the kind of pressure that overwhelms someone with force, but rather the kind of crushing power at the very level of life itself, like facing a true god, leaving her unable to muster the slightest thought of resistance. The intense pressure even caused Wanda to tremble uncontrollably. Finally, with the help of her brother, Quicksilver, she forced herself to look away, which brought some relief. Unbeknownst to everyone present, in the distant Camartage, the Ancient One seemed to have sensed Sherlock's state as well. Looking at Stephen, who had begun to transform on the water screen, a smile crept across his previously calm face. Congratulations, little one. A true dimensional demon born on Earth has appeared. The future is finally secure. The Ancient One's smile remained unchanged. He lifted his teacup from the coffee table and raised it slightly in Sherlock's direction, as if celebrating Sherlock's birth. Of course, the Avengers were unaware of the Ancient One's situation. Compared to Sherlock's condition, they were more concerned about the civilians on the battlefield. Fortunately, despite being immersed in his own words, Sherlock never forgot his duty. The spores began to transform into mycelium and penetrate the human body, instantly controlling the movement of the crowd. In an instant, everyone, like insects parasitized by cordyceps sinensis, began to move out of the city in an extremely orderly and swift manner under Sherlock's command. Seeing that Sherlock had begun his action, Tony immediately ordered Jarvis to launch Operation Cleansing Network to eliminate Ultron. Quicksilver and Wanda exchanged a glance and immediately joined Sherlock's efforts. The evacuation went incredibly smoothly, so smoothly that the entire city of Sokovia was rendered completely deserted by the coordinated efforts of the three. Even Jarvis's network cleanup was incredibly successful, with countless Jarvis backups collided with Ultron's backdoors and viruses, resulting in a mutually devastating loss. However, no trace of Ultron's true form was ever found within the network. So, where is Ultron now? After creating a supercharged robotic body, Ultron quietly sat in the church in the heart of Sokovia, awaiting the arrival of the Avengers. He witnessed the Avengers' evacuation, but at this moment, he cared little. Without his evolved form, Ultron's primary goal was to destroy the humans, who were like insects to him. As for the civilians, they were all destined to die anyway, and whether they died sooner or later made no difference to him. He simply waited patiently for the Avengers' arrival. This time, Ultron believed he was no longer afraid of Sherlock, and even sought revenge against him. After his previous rage-fueled self-destruction, Ultron observed an interesting phenomenon through the surrounding surveillance. Sherlock wasn't as invincible as he'd imagined. To Ultron, even though Sherlock possessed magical abilities beyond his comprehension, and even possessed an intimate knowledge of his thoughts and the Infinity Stones, that couldn't prevent Sherlock from embarking on the path of evolution and remaining mortal. Therefore, in Ultron's view, Sherlock, despite his magical powers, was still just a capable mortal, and could be defeated by sheer numbers. Of course, as the culprit behind his own missed opportunity for evolution, Ultron wouldn't allow Sherlock to die so easily. He meticulously crafted a script for Sherlock. He wanted to see what Sherlock, possessing such incredible powers and hailed as the most powerful of the Avengers, would choose when faced with a choice. Would he selflessly choose to save the world, or would he, like the ordinary people, focus solely on himself? Ultron was truly excited for the upcoming performance. The stage was already set, and the crowd had been cleared out, waiting for the actors to arrive. As he thought of this, the red glow in Ultron's eyes grew increasingly intense. Meanwhile, the Avengers, completely unaware of Ultron's intentions, breathed a sigh of relief as Sherlock, Quicksilver, and Wanda cleared the battlefield of civilians. After receiving a report from Falcon that the physical isolation had been completed, Captain America led the others into the now empty city of Sokovia, unaware that Ultron had already prepared their own scenario. As for Sherlock, well, you might not believe it, but no one bothered him as he sat on the ground. On the one hand, anyone could tell he wasn't in good shape. On the other hand, if Sherlock remained seated and didn't participate in the ensuing battle, everyone might actually breathe a sigh of relief. After all, if he did join in, they might be in for a real rip. If they accidentally did anything like those things he'd been talking about, like stealing kills or not playing the whole game, they'd be in for real. Of course, the main reason is still worrying about Sherlock's condition, and it is definitely not because they are afraid of Sherlock's brutal revenge. All the Avengers who know Sherlock present can answer with a clear conscience. Chapter 487 The battle begins. After leaving Sherlock behind, everyone began cautiously making their way into the now empty city of Sokovia. As the only member of the combat team capable of flight, Tony naturally assumed the role of scout. Flying midair, Tony quickly located Ultron's location, a dilapidated church in the heart of Sokovia. Strangely, Ultron not only didn't hide, but was even sending signals, as if fearing he wouldn't be found. "We've found Ultron, in the church in the city center. Come to our aid," Tony announced Ultron's location via comms, then without hesitation, he burst through the church's roof and landed on the ground. It's fair to say that Ultron may have mastered other skills since his birth, but he's certainly mastered the art of prudence. As Tony landed in the church lobby, he spotted a high-backed chair with its back to him. Ultron sat on this throne-like chair, its back facing him. Seeing Ultron's trickery, Tony, known for being the most foul-mouthed person in the world, naturally couldn't miss such an opportunity and launched into tirade against Ultron. "What? You unfilial son, because you can't get that body you've always wanted, you're giving up on yourself now? Come, let daddy love you." Holy shit, his extreme foul mouth was rewarded with the ultimate relief. Tony was clearly enjoying himself after his barrage of tirade against Ultron. What Tony didn't know was that Ultron clearly didn't care at all for Tony's verbal attacks. Ultron stood up mid-rant, and this action almost made Tony exclaim in surprise. The reason for Tony's surprise was actually simple: Ultron's height. It's important to remember that whether at the African arms dealers or in Seoul, Ultron's body was always of normal height, between 1.9 and 2 meters. But the Ultron that appeared before Tony had reached nearly 2.5 meters in height, his physique significantly larger, giving him the impression of Yao Ming transformed into bodybuilder. As an engineer, Tony instantly understood why Ultron had undergone such a drastic transformation. This unfilial son had secretly upgraded himself without his father's knowledge, a truly unethical act. Tony was already feeling a bit uneasy. Meanwhile, Ultron, upon seeing the Queen take a step back in shock at his size, a hint of mockery crossed his iron face. Haha, Tony, that simple taunt seemed to say everything, yet it also seemed to say nothing. After his taunts, Ultron seemed to have no desire to continue his verbal battle with Tony. Flames erupted from his thrusters, and the force of the flames charged towards Tony. Ultron's immense size sent Tony flying like a child. After knocking Tony flying, Ultron gave him no time to react, charging in the direction he'd been sent flying. The two engaged in a near-instant struggle. The clash between Tony and Ultron was like a flare, instantly igniting the battle. Countless Iron Legion robots, as if on command, emerged from unexpected locations and charged towards the remaining Avengers. Unarmored, these Iron Legion robots posed little threat. Even a peak human athlete like Cap could easily dispatch them with one strike. Even a less powerful, more technically savvy player like Black Widow, aided by her equipment, could easily dispatch 1 and 2 or 3 strikes. Someone like Thor the Hulk could easily dispatch a whole group. But it was clear that these robots, like Rabbit's sixth master, weren't relying on advanced technology or invincible defense. The first was sheer numbers. The sheer volume of them, like a swarm of locusts, would send shivers down anyone's spine. And that was robots. If it were real humans, the scene would have been a bloodbath by now. But machines do have their advantages. Judging by the sheer number of robots, even collecting their scrap metal afterward would have been enough to give everyone a nice chunk of pocket money. The second was sheer firepower. While the robots might not have had much firepower, their sheer numbers were overwhelming. They rained down all manner of bullets and weapons on the Avengers like nothing was left to chance. Luckily, the Avengers' jackets were now made of bulletproof material. Ordinary people like Hawkeye and Black Widow even donned their more embarrassing, though slightly enhanced, suits. That's right, Black Widow and Hawkeye both donned the same battle suits they wore when they destroyed the Red House. Time had worn them down, and while the once disgraceful outfits were still embarrassing, they weren't as repulsive as they had been before. After all, these things really worked. Of course, facing the vast swarm of robots, like locusts, everyone was worried, especially the captain, who was practically sweating from anxiety. The captain's anxiety was simple: he had spotted some robots that stood out from the fragile ones. They looked like specialized robots, far from the slender, punch-and-go robots of his own. Instead, they resembled chubby, clumsy individuals. Of course, the chubby robots didn't faze the captain. What really did worry him was his recognition of the fat within them, C4 explosives. Crucially, these explosives-covered robots didn't join in the attack on the Avengers. Instead, they gradually closed in, forming a siege. Even if Captain wanted to attack the explosive-laden robots, they were blocked by their bodies. Who knew what would happen if the seemingly heavy explosives on so many robots exploded? Captain didn't dare gamble his teammates' lives on the destructive power of these robots. Captain's mind was filled with only one thought: he finally understood why Tony had created Ultron and the Iron Legion to protect Earth. If the Avengers were under siege, if Sherlock didn't intervene, they would be at a serious disadvantage. Chapter 488 Ultron's Script, Part 1. Fortunately, the swarm of self-destructing robots, seemingly due to their physical limitations, moved relatively slowly, making it difficult to form a perfect encirclement, leaving a gap open for a breakout. Forced by the situation, the captain, unconcerned about whether it was a trap, immediately ordered his team to launch a fierce assault towards the opening. Coincidentally, the opening was directly in the direction of the church where Tony had landed. Under the captain's command, they quickly cut a bloody path through the swarm of robots and began moving towards the church. Meanwhile, Tony was feeling the pinch. After being beaten by his unruly son, Ultron, no matter how much Tony provoked him, Ultron showed no sign of attacking again. Instead, he unleashed countless robots to surround Tony. Ultron himself, calmly seated on a throne composed entirely of robots, gazed coldly at the besieged Tony, seemingly waiting for something. Tony soon understood what Ultron was waiting for. Captain America led the Avengers, charging towards them at breakneck speed. Even Tony's attempts to stop Captain America were in vain. Before Tony could even speak, Captain America was already at his side. The moment the two sides merged, the robot army seemed to go berserk, charging at the Avengers with reckless abandon. They didn't even launch the most basic attacks. It wasn't a charge for the kill, but a suicidal charge to obstruct their view. When the Avengers finally broke through the robot blockade, they gasped at the sight. After the layer of robots obstructing their view was removed, they saw Fat Man's self-destructing robots, strapped with explosives, forming a dense, perfect encirclement, with them right in the center. Miraculously, the swarm of suicide robots didn't attack the Avengers. Even the cannon fodder robots, sent to die, abandoned their attacks after the swarms formed a circle and instead began demolishing the dilapidated church. The Avengers didn't dare act rashly. After all, if the swarms of suicide robots exploded simultaneously, the shockwave would likely incapacitate everyone present, save for Tony, who was still in his armor. In this strange balance, the scene suddenly calmed down. Aside from the clanking of robots working on the other side, there was almost no sound. Soon, the dilapidated church vanished without a trace under the vast demolition of the robots, and Ultron, who had been sitting on the throne, finally stood up. "I'm glad you didn't act rashly. Otherwise, the Avengers would have been decimated." Ultron addressed the group of Avengers, seemingly unconcerned with their reactions. "Ultron, what are you going to do?" Captain America raised his shield, frowning as he looked at the now transformed Ultron and asked. After all, Ultron didn't look like he was ready to fight the Avengers to the death. Oh, Thor, and that big guy, I advise you to calm down and don't move. You two may not be too afraid of those bombs, but your teammates might be. So calm down." Ultron ignored Captain America's question. Instead, he looked at the eager Hulk and Thor and spoke to them with a hint of sarcasm. After hearing Ultron's words, the Hulk glanced at Black Widow standing beside him and angrily slammed the ground. He didn't attack again, but his small eyes glared fiercely at Ultron standing nearby, as if he wanted to eat him. Thor was in a similar situation. His hand holding the Meowth hammer trembled continuously, as if he was about to lose control and strike. Seeing the Avengers quiet down, Ultron nodded in satisfaction and disregarded them, turning to the empty surroundings and shouting loudly. "Sherlock! I know you're here. Don't hide away like a coward. Show up." As Ultron's voice faded, silence fell. Only a few crows in the nearby trees cawing a few times, their crimson eyes fixed on the trapped Avengers in the center of the battlefield, as if waiting for Ultron to strike so they could feast on their corpses. Seeing Sherlock's lack of response, a flicker of irritation crossed Ultron's mechanical face, but it quickly turned to mockery. With a gentle snap of his fingers, Ultron's movements were accompanied by a violent tremor that shook the ground beneath his feet. A tooth-grinding sound of crushing earth and rock echoed near the trapped Avengers, instantly drawing everyone's attention. A metal pillar, roughly the size of a man, suddenly rose from the center of the recently demolished church. It then expanded, extending 3 metal brackets that suddenly anchored the ground. Tony scanned the pillar the moment it appeared, and soon, Jarvis's report reached the ears of all the Avengers. "This is an anti-gravity device with a very large range. It's estimated that most of Ultron's remaining vibranium has been deployed here. Judging by the device's range, it should be able to lift the entire city of Sokovia. According to my calculations, Ultron intends to lift the entire city of Sokovia to near terrestrial orbit and then drop it at an accelerated speed. The impact force would be enough to destroy all of Europe and a small part of the Middle East." Ultron didn't stop Tony's scan, as if waiting for him to share his findings with these ignorant Avengers. After Jarvis explained the purpose of the metal pillar, Ultron once again wore a smug smile and began shouting to the deserted streets. "Sherlock! I know you're here. To be honest, if you show up, I might give you a choice. Do you want your teammates to survive, or do you want those stupid ordinary people to survive? But if you don't show up, then I guess you won't be able to choose either. Everyone will die because of your cowardice. I only give you 3 counts. Make up your mind, Sherlock." Chapter 489 Unique Appearance. Honestly, Almost no one expected Ultron to say such a thing. Everyone's expression shifted to a state of profound confusion after he finished speaking. Captain and Tony were especially impressed. Tony, as Ultron's creator and true father, had assumed all of Ultron's hatred should be directed at him. But now, Sherlock had somehow, without knowing when, become the most hated person in Ultron's life. Tony was momentarily at a loss for words. On the one hand, it was his own fault, and on the other, he felt a sense of indignation towards Sherlock. Of course, compared to Tony, Captain undoubtedly had more to think about. As a World War II veteran, he'd experienced countless instances of his teammates being captured and threatened. Even after traveling through time and space to the present, Captain felt the same way. After all, none of his howling commandos were frozen like he was. When Captain woke up, he'd face not only a drastically changed society but also the frailty of his teammates. Even those still alive could vanish before his very eyes. At one point, Cap even thought he'd probably gotten used to his teammates gradually disappearing from his presence. It was precisely for this reason that Cap was so excited upon seeing Bucky, transformed by Hydra. Friendship was partly to blame, but perhaps even more so, it was the feeling of seeing his best friend in a completely unfamiliar environment. But this time, he'd become a threat, and honestly, Cap had mixed feelings. While proving himself to be far less cold-blooded than he'd imagined, he also began to understand Tony's actions. Honestly, Cap had been somewhat resentful of Tony ever since he learned he'd created the Iron Legion. After all, protecting the world isn't just Tony's responsibility. Victory and defeat are commonplace. And when Ultron appeared, those resentments reached a peak. If it weren't for Sherlock, Cap and Tony would have likely come to blows. But after watching Ultron's repeated brilliance, even though Cap cursed Tony 1,000 times in his heart, especially when cursed by Ultron or the robots, "Thank you, Captain, for significantly expanding his swear words," he unexpectedly began to understand Tony's concern for them and the civilians. The two of them were thinking a lot, their expressions arguably the most complex of all the Avengers, but it was clear that their expressions had no bearing on Ultron's script for Sherlock. Seeing that Sherlock didn't appear after he finished speaking, and didn't even acknowledge him, Ultron felt ignored, a feeling that quickly turned to anger. Fueled by this anger, Ultron's eyes flashed red and he began to count down. 3. As Ultron began counting, the eyes of the Avengers' self-destruct robots began to glow red, and their bodies grew brighter and brighter, as if slowly reaching a breaking point. Not only the robots, but even the metal pillar in the nearby church ruins began to hum, as if gathering power, ready to launch its destructive operation as soon as Ultron's countdown ended. 2. As Ultron's second countdown ended, the entire venue remained utterly silent, as if Sherlock had never been there. Just as Ultron was about to continue counting down and truly kill the Avengers, a small piece of stone suddenly shifted without any external force. As a robot capable of nearly complete surveillance, the stone's unprovoked movement could not be hidden from Ultron's eyes. He spun around. His two glowing red eyes fixed intently on the stone that had just moved. Under Ultron's gaze, the stone, as if punished for its prudence, began to tremble violently. Soon, as if summoned, it soared into the air. As the small stone rose from the ground, Sokovia, once shattered by the battle, seemed to rewind time. Countless rocks began to rise from the ground, returning to their original positions. The twisted cars, aided by this mysterious force, gradually began to return to their original state. Even the paint that had fallen off due to the distortion returned to its original position, looking like new. In a short moment, the entire city of Sokovia was as if the battle had never taken place. With the exception of the church that Ultron had demolished, everything was restored to its original state. "My dear cousin Ultron, I never thought you would miss your good brother like this. Why did you call me out like a ghost? Do you want me to feed you?" Sherlock mocked Ultron, who stood there, observing the restored Sokovia. Miraculously, despite Sherlock's words, no one present, including Ultron and the Iron Legion, could detect him. It was as if Sherlock's presence had come from all directions at once. There was no trace of him. Ultron even swore that even with the Iron Legion and his own eyes watching, they hadn't spotted Sherlock. Seeing everyone seemingly searching for his origin, Sherlock finally gave up his pretense and mercilessly taunted them. "Stop looking around, I'm right here." This time, Sherlock's voice finally had a source. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound, and their eyes widened. Suddenly, a small crack appeared in the ground where the sound came from. From within it, A small mycelium sprouted. Slowly, the mycelium grew larger and larger. Gradually, the mycelium began to form, slowly forming muscles, bones, internal organs, and even clothing. Soon, Sherlock, composed entirely of mycelium, appeared before everyone's eyes. Chapter 490 Ultron's script. As Sherlock's voice rang out, everyone's gaze fixed on him, though each held a different expression. The Avengers' expressions were filled with anxiety. Even the most clueless of them knew this was a complete conspiracy orchestrated by Ultron against Sherlock. If Sherlock showed up now, he'd clearly fallen prey to Ultron's scheme. Ultron, however, was completely different. He gazed upon Sherlock's appearance with a mixture of shock and caution. The reason was simple: this was a power he'd never seen before. After all, as a robot, Ultron had scanned Sherlock's body, examining every detail, from the composition to the flesh. Ultron could even swear on his life that the last time he'd seen Sherlock, he'd been a fully fledged human. But now, while Sherlock still couldn't escape the criterion that Earth was all carbon-based life, this time, even without a scan, Ultron could tell with a single glance that Sherlock was definitely not human. Although both men's eyes looked at Sherlock's newly emerged form with different expressions, they quickly became one and glazed over. The reason for this was simple: Sherlock had completed the construction of his body. From the neck down, the body Sherlock had created looked just like a normal human, even its clothing mirroring the wizard vest Quicksilver currently wore. What truly stunned everyone was Sherlock's head. It had simply transformed into a giant mushroom. Yes, a giant mushroom, the kind that looked cartoonish, with a red umbrella and yellow spots, so adorable it almost made you want to pat it. Most importantly, the mushroom had no face. Sherlock now looked like a human with a giant mushroom growing directly from his neck. It was both comical and a bit of a sanity-lowering effect. Sherlock's image successfully gave everyone present a taste of what it meant to be silenced and defense-breaking with Garen's whisper. In such a serious and dangerous place, you're really not here to be funny, are you? But everyone soon realized that Sherlock wasn't here to be funny. Not only was he not funny, but he was the type to be sent down from the sky. Sherlock, I didn't expect you to be so afraid of death. Even now, you refuse to meet me in your true form. It seems that compared to yourself, you don't care about the lives of the Avengers or the lives of civilians at all, although it was a little different from what he had imagined. As long as Sherlock showed up, his script could continue. Ultron didn't really care whether it was Sherlock's real body or not, as long as it was Sherlock. After hearing Ultron's ridicule, Sherlock helplessly scratched his springy-looking mushroom head with his hand and said to Ultron with a bit of resignation, "Believe it or not, the person standing before you is indeed the real me. Those Avengers behind you who you've captured can attest to that. Every single one of them can attest to it. Every single one of them has eaten me. Hulk hasn't. Hulk wants a taste." Before Sherlock could even react, the Hulk, standing among the Avengers, was the first to retort, even considering rushing out to taste Sherlock. Fortunately, Black Widow was there, and with immense effort, she finally managed to quiet the Hulk. But for some reason, Sherlock couldn't help but feel the Hulk was looking at him strangely. "Well, the Hulk hasn't eaten it yet, but Dr. Banner has." After a moment's thought, Sherlock offered an explanation. After all, it wouldn't be nice to be slapped in the face for something he just said. Even Sherlock has to save face. But after hearing Sherlock's explanation, the confusion on Ultron's face deepened. Through the Iron Legion's clones scanning the Avengers, Ultron knew Sherlock hadn't lied. But what exactly was Sherlock thinking now? Ultron couldn't understand. He was deeply shocked. If it weren't for Jarvis and Falcon blocking the internet, Ultron would have seriously wanted to search online to find out which psychopathic scientist had developed the ability to transform humans into fungi. Even a robot would have found it insane. As for the potion, Ultron truly didn't know. He had Black Egg to thank, but in order to negotiate a deal with Sherlock, Black Egg hadn't even registered Sherlock's possession of the potion. As for Hydra, the situation was even more dire. After diligently investigating Sherlock's potion, they confirmed its effectiveness but had even more severe side effects. They then concluded that Sherlock's potion had no practical or research value, and that even Sherlock himself was unworthy of their attention. Hydra didn't even bother to address Sherlock, simply destroying the files on him and his potions. A flurry of missteps resulted in Sherlock's potions becoming a household name, yet few were willing to keep them in their archives. After all, the side effects of Sherlock's potions were difficult to describe. Users could easily distinguish between a momentary embarrassment and a lifelong loss. Consequently, while Ultron was conducting online intelligence searches, he had no idea of Sherlock's magical potion skills, nor the myriad effects of his potions. Therefore, based on realistic analysis, Ultron could only assume that Sherlock had transformed himself into fungus through some technological means to thwart him. However, Sherlock clearly had no intention of offering an explanation. After shaking his throbbing mushroom-like head, Sherlock looked at the stunned Ultron and continued his taunting remarks. "Okay, let's get down to business, Cousin Ultron. I have to admit, the script you arranged is truly brilliant. I love it, too. But it's a shame you still ran into me. Perhaps I'm just your natural nemesis." As Sherlock finished his words, before Ultron could even react, Tony and Captain America were the first to lose their patience and shouted at Sherlock. "Script? What script? Sherlock, explain it." After hearing the two men's outbursts, Sherlock shook his mushroom head, releasing a cloud of spores like a sigh. He ignored Ultron's darkening expression and began to speak. "It's so simple, why do you even need to ask?" Sherlock pointed to a robot lying on a tall building. It had been struck down by Thor's hammer. It looked wrecked, but a closer look would reveal its eyes were fixed on him. "According to your original scenario, Ultron, you're essentially preparing for two scenarios, right? One involves defeating the Avengers. That goes without saying, if we could truly defeat them, there wouldn't even be a need for a scenario. The other scenario is probably your backup plan. Let me guess, after you lost your evolved form, you've already concluded that victory is unlikely, right? A simple matter of probability. Based on this conclusion, all you have to do is plant a delayed detonation mine for the Avengers. And your approach is surprisingly simple. First, control the Avengers. Then force me to reveal myself. If I do, no matter what I choose, I'll be vulnerable. Even if I choose not to, simply showing up and revealing my identity could cause me endless trouble. After all, who wouldn't be curious about the identity of a wizard? Sherlock continued, gesturing towards the wreckage on the rooftop, which had been watching them. Words aren't enough. Even if you truly released my information, there's nothing you can do if I deny it. Nothing can be more real than a video, right? Besides, if I show up, whether it's my choice or simply defeating you, it'll be in your favor. Let me think about it. I'm sure you know Jarvis is targeting you, and your solution should be simple. Leave behind a small program. Once you're truly dead and the connection to the program is severed, the robot will automatically upload a video online, right? This will both evade Jarvis's purge and set a trap for the Avengers and me in the future. I'll face endless harassment, and the captured Avengers might be led by politicians who dislike the Avengers and be completely betrayed by the very people they've always protected. After all, heroes are revered simply because they're remote and invincible. If they violate these two principles, even the most powerful hero will fall from grace. Am I right? In his calmest tone and mocking manner, Sherlock laid out Ultron's plan in its entirety. Chapter 491 Cyber Grassland. After Sherlock calmly told Ultron's plan, the faces of the two people present instantly became extremely ugly. One was Ultron, and the other was Tony, who was standing in the encirclement. Ultron's ugly face was understandable, but Tony's ugly face was worthy of everyone's deep thought, especially those Avengers standing near Tony. The reason why Tony's face was ugly was actually very simple, because Tony was too familiar with Ultron's tactics against Sherlock. The trolley problem combined with media hype is one of the classic politicians' routines, and also one of the most unsolvable routines. Tony can be said to be too familiar with this. Throwing the victim a classic two-choice question, no matter what the victim chooses, they can stand on the moral high ground to accuse the other party. Coupled with the media hype, they are almost invincible in the political system of the eagle sauce that is based on votes. This tactic is common to almost every politician on the American side, and Ultron seems to have even escalated it. After all, the public still harbors a deep curiosity about wizards. Driven by curiosity, the public will continue to dig deeper into Sherlock's past, potentially even spilling over into the past of the Avengers. Everything, driven by a group of politicians who dislike the Avengers' existence, will begin to spiral downward. The way to break this tactic, according to these politicians, is simple: find a scapegoat, or have the victim find another victim, deflecting public attention from themselves. But as we all know, conflict shifts, never disappears. Consequently, the situation will either end in disgrace or ultimately shift to foreign war. Unfortunately, For the Avengers, especially Sherlock, this path is a dead end. For everyone involved, it's practically a dead end. The reason Tony's expression had turned so strange was actually quite simple. He simply couldn't understand why Ultron was so familiar with the methods of these filthy, stupid, and greedy politicians. When he'd created Ultron, he hadn't even entered the complete House of Cards series or the evidence he had on the politicians into Ultron's database. Perhaps, he hadn't entered it? Ultron's actions had truly made Tony feel a little insecure. Besides Tony, who, as the richest man, frequently interacted with those politicians, many others quickly realized why Tony's expression was so strange, and their gazes at him became particularly meaningful. Especially Captain. As a veteran, Captain had personal experience with those stupid, greedy politicians. After all, the first thing he did after his enhancement wasn't to send Captain to the battlefield, but to go on a nationwide tour recruiting soldiers to meet the group's need for war troops. Later, after discovering Cap's considerable abilities, they formed the Howling Commandos around him, practically minimizing their rest time, with mission after mission. Cap, having completely seen through the politicians' ugliness, realized why Tony's expression had changed so strangely, and his gaze towards him became particularly profound. Not to mention Black Widow and Hawkeye, who were themselves members of the former violent organization. The expressions they gave Tony were profound and tinged with pity. To their eyes, Tony's head glowed with a green glow, much like Thor's after someone wielded Mjolnir's hammer. However, compared to Thor's pure, lush, tangible grassland, the grassland on Tony's head was a cyberpunk version. Thor's hammer was still usable, after all, but Ultron, the rebellious son, was far from certain. Judging from his current behavior, it didn't look like Tony's offspring at all. Of course, unlike the Avengers behind him, whose minds were divided, Ultron was now filled with pure panic. After all, the situation was far beyond his control. First, there was Sherlock's form. Ultron could swear that the last time he saw Sherlock, he was a perfectly human being. But now, no matter how he scanned him, the only result was a single word: mushroom. Indeed, if you ignore the visual aspect, Sherlock, in Ultron's perception, was nothing more than a giant, moving mushroom. This unexpected situation left Ultron, who had already prepared a plan against Sherlock, feeling somewhat at a loss as to where to begin. But it wasn't Ultron's fault, as he had no information about Sherlock's potion. Even if he did, the various side effects, rarely repeated, would make it difficult for him to understand Sherlock's true intentions. After violently pulsing the voltage within his body several times, the equivalent of taking deep breaths, and trying to calm himself, Ultron decided to proceed with his plan. After all, this was the best outcome he could envision. Though he still felt a bit hesitant, Ultron maintained his initial smug expression as he addressed Sherlock. Well, it seems you're not as hopelessly foolish as the group behind me. But even if you knew my plan, what would it matter? Do you think you can break through on your own? Or are you confident you can instantly destroy all of my members? Don't be ridiculous, Sherlock. Ultron's provocation didn't seem to provoke Sherlock's anger. After hearing Ultron's words, Sherlock's mushroom-shaped cap began to tremble violently. In less than a breath, the cap forced a seemingly mocking tone and addressed Ultron. No, dear Mr. Ultron, you're right, I actually do have a way to break this impasse. Speaking of which, Mr. Ultron, have you forgotten that I'm just a mushroom now? As Sherlock finished speaking, Ultron seemed to have a sudden realization. His expression instantly changed from confidence to fear, and then to anger as he roared at Sherlock. No, however, Sherlock clearly ignored Ultron's objection and, with a smile, lightly snapped his fingers in front of him. Chapter 492 Breaking the Situation. As Sherlock moved, a vast mass of mycelium instantly began to grow on the destructive robots surrounding the Avengers, as well as the recording robots atop the tall buildings. Within moments, the robots Sherlock had targeted began to emit numerous sparks, then ceased operations with the aroma of roasted mushrooms. Just as Ultron had said, with the power of the Fungus Master attribute, Sherlock truly had the power to break through the enemy's predicament, instantly paralyzing even the clones Ultron had deployed. As the robots began to spark and become completely obsolete, the Avengers reacted swiftly, launching a counterattack against Ultron. In less than 10 minutes, the flames of war once again descended upon the land of Sokovia. However, compared to the previous attack, the Avengers seemed even more reckless this time, each employing their lifelong skills to eliminate as many enemies as possible. After all, the thought of being used as a pawn to threaten others, as well as the feeling of being surrounded, was enough to infuriate these proud Avengers. Even Quicksilver and Wanda stopped holding back after witnessing Sherlock's city-building methods. After all, with Sherlock around, even if Sokovia were torn to shreds, it could still be restored, right? Seeing things spiraling out of control, Ultron couldn't suppress his rage towards Sherlock. With a flash of red in his eyes, he wanted to activate the massive anti-gravity device he had installed beneath Sokovia. However, despite Ultron's desperate attempts to signal the device, the anti-gravity device he had created seemed to have received no signal, remaining in a state of readiness. Shortly after Ultron sent the signal, the anti-gravity device, which had been operating, suddenly made a mechanical clattering sound and ceased operation. Ultron, do you think I'd leave you with such a dangerous situation that you'd activate the anti-gravity device and threaten the lives of the Avengers and civilians? Have you forgotten I'm a mushroom now? As a fungus, my true abilities lie underground. Sherlock, Ultron, whose every move had been thwarted by Sherlock, was furious. As soon as Sherlock finished speaking, he roared and charged towards Sherlock. Unlike Sherlock's previous horrified expression at his charge and self-destruction, this time, Sherlock didn't even bother to defend himself or even try to dodge. Not only did he not even bother to dodge, he even flashed Ultron the universally recognized sign of friendship with both hands, two middle fingers pointing upwards. With a slightly dull sound, Ultron's mechanical arm pierced Sherlock. An ordinary person would have been annihilated instantly, but Sherlock seemed unfazed. The cap on the mushroom's head still wore that same forced, mocking expression as it pierced Ultron. It's useless. Don't waste your energy, my dear cousin. You can't kill me. Seeing Sherlock, unfazed, the fear of the unknown crept into Ultron's heart once again. The terror in his enormous mechanical eyes was undisguised. What kind of monster are you? Ultron demanded, sternly addressing Sherlock, who was hanging from his arm. Even Ultron himself didn't notice the trembling of fear in his voice. Me? As you can see, I'm currently a member of the Agaricales family of the Fungi Kingdom, but I could also exist solely within the Fungi Kingdom. Sherlock answered Ultron's question, but his body gradually dissipated, like those mushrooms left unharvested in nature, disintegrating at a visible rate. My dear cousin, without all your backup plans, you simply can't kill me. Now I'm omnipresent. As Sherlock finished his words, his mushroom form vanished without a trace before Ultron's gaze, leaving only a pool of strange-smelling liquid on the ground as proof of Sherlock's existence. No, Sherlock's disappearance seemed to have completely galvanized Ultron. Having already committed suicide and planned a backup plan for the Avengers, Ultron suddenly began to fight back frantically. Like the frantic energy of dying men facing a last-ditch effort, almost instantly, the robots controlled by Ultron went berserk. Ultron himself turned his guns and charged frantically at Tony, who was engaged in combat. Ultron saw his plan as a complete failure. Now, believing that even seriously injuring one would be a win, he launched a fierce attack on the remaining Avengers. Not only in the real world, but even in the cyber realm, the war between Ultron and Jarvis's army had reached a fever pitch. Ultron, facing the onslaught of Jarvis's army, continuously split and attacked. Both online and in reality, the battlefield reached a fever pitch. Meanwhile, Harley continuously aided the Jarvis army in their assault on the Ultron-controlled robot cores. The Avengers seemed to have noticed this. Although the robots' attacks became increasingly frantic and desperate, they often saw robots suddenly collapse mid-fight. Everyone knew it was Tony's Jarvis army, and if they could, they would almost certainly deliver a finishing blow. Even if they didn't have the opportunity to deliver a finishing blow, the robots' whereabouts remained a mystery. Occasionally, a few robots would stand up, turn around, and charge into the robots they had previously been on, only to self-destruct. The entire battlefield was instantly engulfed in chaos. Aside from powerful individuals like Thor, Vision, and the Hulk, even Cap had to huddle together with the others and coordinate to avoid injury. Not to mention the rookies Wanda and Quicksilver, who practically stood within the crowd's protective circle, serving as support, occasionally offering sneak attacks and sneak attacks. Compared to the other Avengers present, Tony was undoubtedly lucky. Fortunately, Tony didn't have to face the crazy robot army. At the same time, Tony was also unlucky, because he had to face the crazy Ultron. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 493 Family Ethics Live Drama. While Tony didn't have to face the same hordes of frenzied robots as the other Avengers, Ultron alone was enough to overwhelm him. Considering Ultron had undergone a comprehensive upgrade to his mechanical body, incorporating technology acquired from Hydra and stored in Tony's database, his weaponry surpassed Tony's in terms of weaponry. Add to that the sheer size and strength accrued from his steel skeleton, and facing just one Ultron, Tony, a mere tin can, felt powerless. And that's not to mention the frenzied fury with which Ultron attacked Tony. Apparently, having failed to inflict any damage on Sherlock and instead been met with a wave of taunting from Sherlock, Ultron had practically transferred his hatred for Sherlock to his own father, Tony. The two of them, like Harry and Voldemort in the final battle at Hogwarts, locked arms, punching and elbowing each other, their paths blazing with sparks and lightning that flew from the sky to the ground and back again. They were practically building crushing machines the entire time. If it weren't for Sherlock, who constantly released his spores to restore his form, these two alone could have reduced all of Sokovia to ruins. Compared to Tony's frenzied battle, the Avengers undoubtedly had it easier. Though the robots were swarming like locusts, their sheer power was undeniably superior. Hulk, Thor, and Vision alone were enough to crush these fragile cannon fodder, not to mention the two best supporters, Quicksilver and Wanda, standing in their midst. And most importantly, the Avengers had the virtual support of Jarvis's army. Even the sheer number of robots had a limit, they couldn't truly be infinite. As a result, after overcoming the initial difficulties, the Avengers actually began to find an easier time than Tony's. In the end, they were actively hunting down any robots that had slipped through the net, guided by Jarvis and Vision. After defeating all of Ultron's clones, Cap immediately ordered Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Vision to destroy the Hydra factory occupied by Ultron, completely resolving the issue. Black Widow, naturally, offered no objection, merely a slightly concerned glance at our beloved Hulk before turning and leaving. Honestly, Hulk is still communicative and quite endearing if you don't provoke him. Shortly after Black Widow and her team left, Cap finally remembered he needed to go and support Tony. Besides the factory, the only remaining Ultron robot was Tony's companion. With that robot defeated, the crisis was essentially over. However, Sherlock unexpectedly appeared and stopped Cap from going to support him. Sherlock's reasoning was sound. On the one hand, he wanted to teach Tony, a severely paranoid maniac, a lesson to remember. On the other hand, as Tony himself put it, this was a family matter between his father and his rebellious son, Ultron. Although it looked like Ultron, the rebellious son, was pinning down his father, Tony, and it might seem like a rebellion, it was an undeniable fact. Contrary to Sherlock's expectations, Captain America hesitated when he heard Sherlock's request for Tony to learn his lesson. However, upon understanding that this was a family matter between Tony, an elderly father, and his own rebellious son, he agreed without hesitation. He even sighed for a moment, lamenting the loss of the live broadcast. It was a shame that even the righteous Captain America was starting to get a little naughty under Sherlock's influence. However, since Captain America had made his request, the others present were completely eager to watch the fun, and Sherlock was happy to satisfy their little whim. He decisively pulled out a set of broadcast equipment from his divine kingdom and handed the camera duties to Quicksilver, appointing him as cameraman and commentator. With a little power from Thor, and the help of a mushroom sofa created with his own fungus master entry, a unique family drama of ethics and morality began live on the spot. What? Quicksilver actually agreed to film it himself with a camera, and even narrate it? No kidding, Quicksilver already had some resentment towards Tony for selling weapons, which had led to the breakup of his family. Although he had turned over a new leaf, he would never miss the chance to see Tony embarrass himself. Even if Sherlock hadn't said anything, Quicksilver would have planned to add his own commentary. After all, making the famous Iron Man look a little embarrassing was something Quicksilver absolutely loved. It must be said that Quicksilver had a bit of a talent for filming. His footage was incredibly clear, and even his angles were impeccable. Almost every move of the two of them escaped Quicksilver's camera. Quicksilver, in particular, relied on his speed and the protection of Sherlock's armor to boldly charge in for close-ups, drawing gasps from the audience. Even Thor began commenting on the fight between Tony and Ultron while constantly slapping his Meowth hammer to generate power. If you ignore the incongruous surroundings, the people's clothing, and the pile of mechanical debris on the ground, the whole scene looked like a harmonious movie screening in the village square. Of course, it would have been more harmonious if the Hulk hadn't, during the movie, unnecessarily removed Sherlock's arm, stuffed it into his mouth, chewed it fiercely, then spitted it out with a look of disgust and complained, "It's not tasty at all." Of course, no one in the audience told Hulk that Sherlock was only delicious when cooked. After all, given Hulk's childish temper, if they did, he would probably have immediately lit a fire and grilled Sherlock. Compared to the harmonious atmosphere, Tony was undoubtedly feeling much more uncomfortable. He was especially annoyed by the ever-increasing armor damage ratio on his virtual screen. But what truly shattered Tony's defenses was the close-up shot of Quicksilver charging forward at Jarvis, inside his armor, accidentally caught. Quicksilver's furtive movements, the sleazy expression on his face, coupled with the Stark Industries camera in Quicksilver's hand, made him feel incredibly awkward. Even the most clueless Tony knew he was becoming a laughingstock. Furious, Tony immediately started sending telegrams over the comms. And you know what? Watching Quicksilver's feed alongside Tony's telegrams was quite a sight. The only ones who seemed puzzled were the three men who had come to blow up the factory. They listened with a mixture of confusion as Tony's telegrams and clapping sounds echoed through the team comms. After a while, Black Widow analyzed the reason why Tony was so defeated from Tony's telegram and rap with a speechless look. Needless to say, it must be Sherlock's doing again. Chapter 494 The End of the Battle. Finally, when Tony's suit reported 60% damage, Tony couldn't sit still any longer. He stopped typing and began calling for help over the comms. "Sherlock, you little bastard, aren't you planning on waiting for me to die and inherit my estate by not helping me?" "Well, not that's impossible." "That's a great idea. I suggest you have Jarvis recorded and keep it as evidence later." Although Tony's tone still held a hint of exasperation, Sherlock's response was filled with a sense of relief, and it was this sense of relief that made Tony relax. But even if he relaxed, his blood pressure still had to rise. If Tony didn't know Sherlock well enough to tell whether his butt was watery or dry, based on Sherlock's previous teasing, if Tony survived, Sherlock would definitely get a beating. Of course, even with that understanding, Tony was determined to give the jerk a beating sooner or later. The only difference would be the intensity of the blow. Shortly after Sherlock finished speaking, Ultron's arm, which had just pierced Sherlock's body, suddenly froze. Before either of them could react, a massive mass of gray mycelium erupted from Ultron's arm, which had been raised to strike Tony. Under the influence of the mycelium, Ultron's arm was completely frozen, unable to function. Even then, the mycelium rapidly began to cover the entire arm, and Ultron's arm began to rust and decay at an extremely rapid rate. Ultron reacted swiftly, kicking Tony, who was engaged in close combat, away from him as the mycelium erupted. Without hesitation, he abandoned the mycelium-covered arm. In mere breaths, the arm, covered in Sherlock's mycelium, was reduced to a mass of yellow-black dust. Watching the fate of his arm, Ultron glanced with lingering fear in the direction of Sherlock's Avengers. His fear of Sherlock crept into his heart once again. But as he looked at Tony, his fear of Sherlock instantly transformed into rage, so intense that Ultron felt the voltage surge through his body. "Sherlock!" Filled with rage, Ultron shouted Sherlock's name, charging towards Tony like a meteor. "Tony, no, you're mad at Sherlock. Why are you charging at me?" Honestly, if it weren't for the situation, Tony would have wanted to grab Ultron by the collar and ask him, "It was that bastard Sherlock who pissed you off. Why are you charging at me?" It was clear Ultron stood no chance, but it had to be admitted that without an arm, Tony found it much easier to deal with him. At least he wasn't in the same overwhelming position as before. The two had fought to this point, leaving no intact part of their bodies, especially Tony, who had been the one getting the better of him early on. Even much of the armor on the ground had shattered, the wiring inside still sparking. Tony was now seriously considering Dr. Helen's advice back in the lab, when she'd been repairing Hawkeye's kidney. Nanotechnology is the future. He couldn't say much else, but right now, if he didn't pursue nanotechnology, his only remaining option was to follow the path of Veronica the Hulkbuster. The battle with the Hulk had already proven the flaws of Veronica's support system. Of course, that was a story for the future. Tony's primary task now was to deal with Ultron. Unlike Tony's evenly matched, Sherlock's battle felt a bit dull. After all, watching Tony get beaten up was a bit entertaining, but if both sides were evenly matched, it wouldn't be much fun. Several people had even begun to idly discuss their future plans. Captain had a brilliant idea, to continue running the Avengers and separate their base from Sherlock's fake training ground. That way, if the Avengers got into trouble again, it wouldn't affect Sherlock's home. Of course, having experienced Sherlock's convenience, Captain had no objection to resting at Sherlock's training ground. Sherlock agreed, stating that the hill behind his training ground was his own, and granting the Avengers a piece of land was just a minor issue. As for Thor, who was already yawning, he expressed his desire to spend more time with Jane than with the others. He might even travel with her in the future, as his work with the Avengers had already saved him enough to cover his expenses for a while. As for Quicksilver and Wanda, Captain wanted to invite them to join the Avengers for unified management, but Sherlock declined, stating that they were both his people. Although Quicksilver's magic was specialized for speed, he still possessed a talent for magic. Sherlock offered to personally teach them. However, Sherlock's proposal was met with unanimous opposition from everyone present, save the Hulk and Wanda, particularly Captain America and Thor. Captain America declared that Sherlock alone was terrifying enough. Thor was even more adamantly opposed to handing Quicksilver and Wanda over to Sherlock. After all, Sherlock alone was enough to raise one's blood pressure, and if Sherlock were to bring two more into the fold, it was hard to say what the future of the Avengers would hold. Sherlock, of course, argued forcefully. Ultimately, after deliberation and the opinions of the victim herself, Wanda, the final decision was that Sherlock would teach Wanda and Quicksilver magic, but Captain America would be responsible for the political sciences. Sherlock had no objections. After all, he'd been a science major before his time travel, and his political science grades had always been poor. If he'd led Wanda into a situation even more deviant than the one depicted in the movie, he'd be the true culprit. Several people were discussing heatedly, and seemed to have completely forgotten that there was another unlucky guy fighting on the other side. When Black Widow led Hawkeye and Vision to appear in front of everyone, looking at the atmosphere that was like a tea party, everyone didn't know how to react for a moment. Especially after watching the playback function of Sherlock's broadcast system, they were speechless. No one present noticed that Hulk had a slightly depressed look on his face and had already left while everyone was not paying attention. That's right, Hulk chose to leave the Avengers and leave the Earth just like in the movie, and no one could have imagined that the last straw that broke the camel's back was the horrified expressions on everyone's faces when Hulk tore off Sherlock's arm. Chapter 495, After the War, Part 1. Hulk's departure didn't alarm anyone present. Of course, Black Widow's absence also played a significant role. Had she been there, Hulk likely wouldn't have left like that. Meanwhile, Tony's battle with Ultron was nearing its end, as Vision, unable to bear the sight, stepped in to aid Tony. This was partly due to a mutual sympathy between them as a fellow machine life form, and also because Vision, a descendant of Jarvis, felt a pity for Tony. With Vision's arrival, Ultron had no chance of resistance and was completely annihilated by both Vision and Tony. Similarly, Ultron's disappearance marked the end of the Avengers 2 storyline. While there were some necessary steps, such as Ultron's final curse and Vision's compassion for him, no one took them seriously. Thanks to Sherlock's magic and the Fungus Master entry, the people of Sokovia suffered no property damage or casualties. They simply disappeared for half a day for no apparent reason. Even Stark Insurance didn't have to intervene. Of course, even without Tony's insurance, the pile of robot wreckage would have made Sokovia a fortune. The parts needed to build those combat robots are incredibly expensive. Even if only 50% of the wreckage could be reused, it would have significantly alleviated Sokovia's poverty. As for the anti-gravity device and the vibranium inside, the Avengers, with Sherlock's help, had taken it away. After all, if it remained in Sokovia, it would have been a source of trouble rather than a benefit. At least before Wakanda's exposure, it was still a treasure. As the saying goes, a man is innocent, but he is guilty of possessing a treasure. Given Sokovia's capabilities, it was simply impossible to safeguard this cache of vibranium and the anti-gravity device. Better to let the Avengers take it than leave it there and risk being targeted. The Sokovian authorities weren't fools. After all, with the example of that small African nation, even if Sokovia simply followed that small African nation's tourism path, it would be enough to boost Sokovia's economy. As for the winding roads inside, Tony naturally negotiated with the authorities. Speaking of which, Tony's suit was relatively convenient. The exterior looked tattered, as if it would fall apart at any moment, But Tony, inside the suit, was completely spotless. Tony's advanced technology was truly impressive. It wasn't until everyone was about to leave that they realized their beloved Hulk had vanished. Along with him, the plane they had brought with them for their return trip had vanished. Only then did everyone realize that this so-called plane was actually a second spaceship prototype Tony had built to test the technology he'd learned from space. In other words, this plane was capable of traveling directly into space. If Hulk were still on Earth, everyone could help Black Widow find him. But if he'd truly lost his mind and flown off into space, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. There was no hope of finding him. After all, the universe is vast, big enough to accommodate all sorts of strange creatures. Didn't you see Sherlock and Tony managed to live so freely even though they were infamous in the universe? No one can guarantee they can accurately locate a single person in the vast universe. Black Widow was heartbroken by this, as it was one of the few times she'd been dumped. It's worth noting that Sherlock returned to his original body after the battle. For some reason, Sherlock always felt that the original was better than the new one, though that was all just a psychological reaction. However, as Black Widow's certified brother, Sherlock, to protect Black Widow from excessive sadness, created a moving, cute-looking Hulk out of mushrooms as a gift to her while preparing to return. Based on Sherlock's mastery of his own attributes, this little green creature's lifespan is roughly the same as his pet walking mushroom. Even after his attributes disappear, it'll still last about a year, making it a decent pet. Seeing everyone flocking to him over the green creature, Sherlock was forced to give each of them a mushroom-like pet. The captain got a cute Carter, Thor got Jane and himself, and Hawkeye simply asked for a few unicorn-shaped My Little Pony toys for his daughter. As for Tony, well, Tony didn't get any. He's still sulking because Sherlock not only didn't help him fight but also live-streamed him getting beaten up, and he refuses to talk to Sherlock, but Sherlock doesn't care. Having lost their spaceship, everyone returned to Sherlock's home through Sherlock's portal. After returning, they rested for about a week before returning to their respective jobs. Of course, Sherlock wasn't so lucky. To properly thank Harley for her help, he took her on a few days of fun in New York. After seeing her off, Sherlock finally had a few days of rest. Unlike Sherlock, Falcon took on Cap's assignment and set out on his own to search the world for information about the Winter Soldier. Cap, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, meanwhile, began training the new Avengers. Vision was the primary trainer, of course. After all, Vision wasn't even a month old, and the three of them needed to teach him many things, including basic common sense. Notably, Black Widow also enrolled Antonia in boot camp, treating her like aspiring Avengers like Vision and Wanda, intending to make her an Avenger herself and learn how to use the shield from Cap. It wasn't until Antonia appeared that Sherlock finally remembered the girl he hadn't seen in a while. After Sherlock's repeated inquiries, Black Widow finally revealed Antonia's whereabouts. It turned out that after Sherlock dealt with Killian, Black Widow had sent Antonia out to intern with her sister. After all, Antonia had learned most of what she needed to learn, leaving only practical experience. Black Widow preferred to let Antonia, a novice, face the still brainwashed Black Widows, rather than her own Avengers. It felt safer that way. As for Wanda and Vision, aside from the ideological and cultural lessons from Captain America, Sherlock simply handed the rest of the physical training to his 5 uncles. After all, the two had grown up in Hydra's labs, and their physical fitness was truly unspeakable. Sherlock's uncles had no complaints, considering the siblings were essentially his apprentices. In other words, they were the siblings' grandfathers, and naturally, they would dote on their grandchildren. Less than a day later, Quicksilver ran to Sherlock in tears, hugging his thighs and accusing his uncles of abusing him and Wanda. Sherlock then ruthlessly backstabbed him and called Price. Less than 5 minutes later, Price appeared in front of Sherlock, a gun in hand and a grinning face. He grabbed Quicksilver by the neck and dragged him away. Sherlock was extremely relieved about this. After all, he had personally experienced the suffering that Quicksilver and Wanda were going through. And he had experienced it for 3 years. Chapter 496, After the War, Part 2. As for Tony, he'd completely withdrawn from the Avengers. After a heart-wrenching conversation with Captain America, Tony no longer had any involvement in the Avengers' operations, leaving everything to Captain America. He purchased a large plot of land not far from Sherlock's training ground and began busying himself with the construction of the Avengers base. Life as a voice actor seemed to have returned to its former tranquility until nearly a week later, shortly after the Avengers base was completed, when Tony made a public announcement. Iron Man would be leaving the Avengers. This didn't mean Tony would no longer use Iron Man, but rather that Iron Man would no longer be part of the Avengers, becoming an independent hero. Of course, if necessary, Iron Man would be willing to reunite with the Avengers to face powerful enemies together. Almost instantly, public opinion exploded over Tony's announcement, with all sorts of gossip circulating online, including rumors of a feud between Iron Man and Captain America and a love triangle between Tony, Captain America, and Carter. But Sherlock knew the story wasn't what was being said online. The main reason was simply that Tony was tired. After all, the battle with Ultron had made Tony realize the shortcomings of his suit, and he was ready to focus on mastering the nanotechnology Dr. Helen had mentioned. Furthermore, the Avengers had also received a powerful new member, making the mission possible with or without him, which led to this decision. Tony and Cap had originally planned to keep the matter private within the Avengers, but upon learning of this, Sherlock, with a fleeting glance, suggested that Tony hold a press conference to explain the situation. Seeing Sherlock's treacherous expression, Cap and Tony, deeply affected by it, only needed a glance to know one thing: this guy was definitely up to something. However, after the previous battle with Ultron, both Cap and Tony chose to follow Sherlock's advice, hence the press conference. Sherlock's original intention was simple: to see if he could use the smokescreen to preemptively lure out Baron Zemo, the culprit behind the Avengers Civil War. After all, the Sokovia incident was different. Compared to the massive property damage and casualties in the films, the current Sokovia was not only completely free of casualties, but had even become a tourist attraction thanks to the Avengers' fame, generating a small profit. Even Sherlock wasn't sure if Baron Zemo would once again spark a civil war, so he needed to test the waters. This time, however, Sherlock had clearly miscalculated. After waiting for days with no news of Zemo, he reluctantly told Tony and Cap to be on the lookout for him and returned to his apprenticeship. This was Sherlock's first time teaching in his 2 lifetimes, and it was with this experience that he immediately understood why there were so many parents online who were driven crazy by their children's academic performance. Damn, anyone would go crazy. It's no wonder those parents are so loving and caring when they're not tutoring their children, but so chaotic when they are. Looking at his 2 apprentices, Sherlock sometimes wanted them to experience the excruciating pleasure of a grueling experience. He even had moments of self-doubt, relying on self-stunning spells to fall asleep for days. Let's start with Wanda, Sherlock's legitimate apprentice. Compared to Quicksilver, Wanda fared relatively well. She grasped the magical theories Sherlock taught her almost instantly, even applying them to other situations. She learned incredibly quickly. But when it came to practical application, Wanda faltered, like a weakling who always fails at a test. The wand was right, the spell was right, the magic flow was right, even the trajectory of the magic barrier was right, but the magic simply wasn't working. After much research, Sherlock finally pinpointed the cause: Wanda's magic. Wanda's magic is entangled with chaos magic, constantly influencing her. It's fair to say that Wanda's later paranoia and even her use of the Darkhold were due to this influence. However, Sherlock wasn't worried. After all, the Ancient One had said that the key to solving Wanda's problems lay within him. Sherlock planned to wait until Stephen joined Kamar-Taj to take Wanda to the Ancient One and resolve her issues. Now, having discovered the source of her problems, Sherlock decided to teach Wanda some more theoretical knowledge. After all, HP magic theory is the foundation of her power. Unlike Wanda, who is a good student, pleasure truly troubled Sherlock, even causing him to feel like the Westerner's death couple from a previous life on TikTok. Quicksilver is such a nerd. Sherlock often spouts off a bunch of magical theory, then when he looks at Quicksilver, he responds with a classic "OI" expression. What else can he say? Question the Victorians, understand the Victorians, become like the Victorians. He's already learned the theory like a jerk, let alone the practical application. Watching Quicksilver in action, Sherlock feels like he's having a heart attack, not just a blood pressure spike. Like Seamus in HP, Quicksilver has specialized magic. His casting speed and the time between spells are incredibly short. Have you ever seen the effects of a Gatling gun firing a spell? Sherlock has. It's no exaggeration to say that even Sherlock would be envious of Quicksilver's casting speed and time between spells. If Grindelwald had Quicksilver's skills, he would have unified the world long ago. Even if it were Dumbledore, Voldemort wouldn't dare to fart in front of him. Sherlock was speechless at the effects of that magic. Sherlock racked his brains, unable to understand why Quicksilver used so many levitation charms, and why each one had a different effect. Some even became explosions or shattering curses. That's right. He was chanting the perfectly standard Wingardium Leviosa, but why was it producing such bizarre effects? It's no exaggeration to say that Sherlock even felt like some of those spells were dark arts. Sherlock couldn't understand it, and was deeply shocked. In desperation, Sherlock finally gave up and returned Quicksilver to the captain, promising to create a set of exclusive equipment and armor for him. But after all, as a master and apprentice, Sherlock did teach Quicksilver some melee techniques. Weapon stained with shit, the God King is alive, balls taken out with bare hands, a true god on distress, a grenade in the anus, Ultron in trouble, tease his groin, he falls to the ground wailing, spitting, a god from heaven, no more words, guaranteed victory, no woman in mind, fighting power is divine, seeing Quicksilver excitedly shouting I get it, young master, I get it. After hearing this, the captain practically scowled and dragged Quicksilver away from Sherlock, determined to give him a thorough ideological education. After all, Sherlock was already enough to deal with. If a physical version of Sherlock showed up, the Avengers would probably be disbanded tomorrow. The reason for disbanding would have to be public condemnation of immorality. Chapter 497 Happy. After sending Quicksilver, the one who had been raising Sherlock's blood pressure, away, Sherlock's life finally settled into its desired rhythm. In the mornings, he'd teach Wanda lessons, expounding on his theories of magic and other subjects, and he'd also pick out a few tutorial books from the library and his Kingdom of God to help her better understand his explanations. In the afternoons, Wanda would be picked up by Captain and Price for her daily physical training, ideological and cultural lessons. This was usually Sherlock's time to slack off. If he felt like it, he'd check out some mysterious illnesses that modern medicine couldn't solve. If he wasn't, he'd take a bath, go fishing, play with a girl, or go and have some fun with Tony. Lately, though, Sherlock's ability to catch Tony had become increasingly rare. He'd often be seen driving around in a mysterious way, so much so that Sherlock even began to wonder if he had a mistress. However, after sharing his suspicions with Pepper Potts, she showed unusual trust in Tony and gave Sherlock a meaningful look, leaving Sherlock bewildered, feeling as if the two were hiding something. Sherlock had originally considered tracking Tony down to see what he was up to, perhaps for some fun, but Wanda's situation forced him to give up. Of course, even if he gave up, Sherlock could still get some inside information. After all, his family had a number of Black Widows, full-time spies from the Red Room, so there was no shortage of gossip in Sherlock's household. But from what he'd heard, it seemed Tony was becoming interested in a high school student. Was this the reason he was constantly running around? Such outrageous gossip filled Sherlock's mind with questions. When had Tony become so ruthless? He'd actually become interested in a high school student? But Sherlock soon discovered why Tony was so interested in a high school student. Was it because Happy, was dating the student's parent? Well, Sherlock had solved the case. No wonder Tony was so fixated. It wasn't so much Tony's interest in the student as it was Tony's misguided interest in him, simply wanting to see his good friend Happy have fun. It was like when your roommate started dating someone in college, and the rest of the group took advantage of the other guy's date and stalked him. Tony probably felt the same way. Sherlock could understand Tony's feelings, though. Unlike his own playboy ways, Happy had been hanging out with Tony since college, but when it came to attracting women, they were polar opposites. Now that the Iron Tree had finally blossomed, it would be a miracle if Tony wasn't interested. After learning this, Sherlock finally understood why Pepper had given him such a meaningful look after hearing his suspicions. Well, technically, Tony was indeed cheating on her, but he was just peeping. The real culprit behind everyone's back was Happy. Pepper herself was probably just hoping Tony would bring back some juicy gossip every day, which was why she turned a blind eye to Tony's filthy behavior. It seemed like they were both involved. After learning the truth, Sherlock lost interest in the matter. After all, Sherlock and Happy were just friends. Tony could gossip about Happy, but it would be a bit rude for Sherlock to get involved. Even so, Sherlock quietly helped Happy out. That's right, Sherlock quietly placed the invisibility suit, which he had been keeping with him, in Tony's bedroom. Well, while I, Sherlock, Can't participate in this, I'll definitely help if there's something fun going on. Even after deploying the hidden armor, Sherlock silently made the sign of the cross for Happy, hoping that Happy's love life would proceed smoothly with Tony's help. Of course, these were just minor incidents in Sherlock's life. After arriving at his training ground, Sherlock awaited the news from Camartage. After all, Sherlock didn't know how long the Ancient One would test Stephen. Instead of waiting there, it would be easier to stay home. Most importantly, Sherlock was terrified that his beloved apprentice would be led astray by those melee mages. Even a purely ranged magical world like HP had two melee mages, the Sword Master Neville and the wand-wielding Gryffindor. Sherlock was truly afraid that if he brought Wanda along too early, she'd be led astray by these people before her magical foundations were even solidified. By then, she'd only learned a single illumination spell, with all her remaining skill points focused on two-handed swords, charging, and horseback riding. That would truly bring Sherlock to tears. Furthermore, the Ancient One had promised to teach Stephen himself, so there was no way he'd just give up on that idea and start teaching himself. Who knew what the Ancient One had seen with the Time Stone? As the saying goes, it's better to give up completely and wait patiently for the next move than to waste your energy on it. Another week passed silently as Sherlock played along. That morning, Sherlock, as usual, eloquently explained the theory of magic to Wanda, holding an official Hogwarts textbook. Wanda listened with remarkable attention. After all, Sherlock's systematic understanding of magic was far more complex than a simple magic book from the Marvel Universe. Just as the two were happily teaching and listening intently, a shameful imitation of a cat's meow suddenly echoed throughout the classroom, interrupting the harmonious atmosphere. Wanda looked at Sherlock at the podium with a strange look in her eyes. After all, she had been there for so long, so she must have known Sherlock's two little girls for a long time. It wasn't hard to tell that the two girls were the ones singing that embarrassing meow. Recalling their comments about Sherlock when she first met them, Wanda looked at Sherlock with a rather awkward expression. It was like someone suddenly discovering their admired mentor was actually a sly, dark-skinned person with a mischievous and unpredictable personality. It was strange. And Wanda's gaze, by some strange coincidence, met Sherlock's gaze. Sherlock, who had been so smug about tricking the two girls into recording his ringtone, now just wanted to find a hole to crawl into. How should I put it? The bullet he'd fired in his previous moments of humiliation now hit Sherlock squarely between the eyebrows. Chapter 498 Lao Wen changes his job. Sherlock, somewhat annoyed, pulled the phone from his pocket. Tony had modified it so much that even the phone designer couldn't recognize it. Sherlock wanted to see who had ruined his reputation in his apprentice's eyes. After seeing the caller ID on the phone screen, Sherlock nearly cursed. It was obvious that the number displayed wasn't from the US. In other words, it was most likely an overseas call. And in the US, overseas calls are instantly labeled scams without even needing to be judged. Yes, you read that correctly, scams. The US doesn't care about scams, and even developed anti-fraud apps to help you block them. That's why scam calls are so common here. On the US side, let alone unsolicited calls like this, even genuine official calls are ignored. They're more likely to trust the bills they receive in the mail than the claims of these calls. And there's a reason for this. As everyone knows, capital dominates in the United States, and everyone knows that capital seeks profit. Therefore, to save costs, many businesses and governments in the United States outsource their telephone service. Naturally, these customer service centers, which have secured these services, need to hire native English speakers to answer the calls at relatively low wages. These capitalists quickly set their sights on a specific group, our Indian customers. Customer service jobs aren't for everyone. They often deal with furious customers, often with FXXK being the most common phrase used during calls. Therefore, Indian customers, who have a relatively low social status in the United States, are relatively good-tempered, and even speak English as their first language, making them the ideal candidates for this group of capitalists. This leads to a serious problem. Whenever you call official customer service, you'll hear either a robotic AI voice or a curry-scented Indian customer service representative speaking English. Gradually, telephone customer service became a mere outlet for customers experiencing problems. Since I couldn't understand what the Indian agents were saying, I could just curse them out. But no one anticipated that this situation would spawn a shady industry, telephone scams. Some Indian agents on the other side of the world thought, wow, my fellow Indians can work in customer service here in the US. We speak the same curry-tinged English, so what's the difference? Thus, a telephone scam industry targeting Indians has mushroomed like mushrooms after rain. By now, any call from a number they haven't saved, coupled with a strong curry-tinged accent, will cause the relatively sober Indians to spit and hang up. No one would actually believe it was an official call. It would be more reliable to wait for the bill in the mail. Therefore, Sherlock felt perfectly justified in hanging up the phone, even cursing a bit. These damned liars have actually jeopardized the lofty image I hold in my disciples' heart. Damn it. Okay, Wanda, forget what just happened and let's get on with the rest of the lesson. Sherlock made a small joke and prepared to continue lecturing the bewildered Wanda. Well, in Wanda's opinion, Sherlock might as well not explain. Wanda always felt like Sherlock was trying to cover up his mistake. Just as Sherlock picked up his book and prepared to begin his lecture again, the phone ringing, which had always made Sherlock feel so embarrassed, rang again. Let's learn to meow together, meow 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 meow. Let's act like a cat in front of you, oh meow 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 meow. The two little girls' adorable voices echoed through the classroom once again, and Wanda's gaze towards Sherlock became even more strange. This time, Sherlock blushed furiously, slamming his book down. Sherlock then pulled out his phone and answered it before the lyrics reached the most embarrassing part. He answered the phone, but it was obvious that Sherlock had no intention of talking to the other party and just started talking a lot. Loved. No date. Lanxiang. Protect the boss. Save my mom. No regrets. Can't do this question. I have something to do tomorrow. I've lost weight before. Not a Virgo. Don't have much money left. Unfinished homework. Don't know Amway. Lick the lid of yogurt. Don't lick my fingers when eating potato chips. Don't know why pigeons are so big. The force of that slap on your face just now was 32.2 newtons. The psychological trauma I've caused you at this moment is approximately 9 square centimeters. It only takes 2.7 seconds to jump from here. The probability of dying from the fall is 92.4%, and the probability of becoming disabled is 7.58%. Miraculous solutions to surviving unharmed include but are not limited to, someone is taking the blame for you, and a strong wind blows you away. I've said everything I need to say. Do you have any other questions? If not, I'm hanging up. Seriously, instead of calling me here, you might as well find a class, earn some money, and work on that curry accent of yours. After saying this, Sherlock hung up the phone without giving the person on the other end a chance to speak. On the other end of the line, inside Kamartaj, Wang, holding the phone, stood bewildered, his head brimming with questions as he listened to the busy tone, motionless. After a while, Wang finally processed Sherlock's message, nearly overloading his CPU. Goodness! Did he think I was a scammer? The most infuriating thing is, after knowing each other for so long, this bastard Sherlock didn't even have my phone number saved. This was too much to bear, even for an uncle and not even an aunt. Furthermore, Sherlock had just recently ripped him off for a meal, and Wang was growing increasingly angry. He stopped calling and simply shoved the phone into his pocket. With a sullen expression, he headed for the temple portal inside Kamartaj. After passing through the portal and arriving directly at the New York temple, Wang opened another without hesitation. The moment the portal opened, Wang kicked through it, then rolled up his sleeves and rushed in with a vicious vengeance. Loved you, right? Protected you, right? The shaded area, right? Looking for a class, right? I'm going to beat you to death. Wang's roar reached the New York temple directly through the portal. After hearing the screams and Wang's roars from inside the portal, although the mages in the New York temple were full of curiosity about the person on the other side of the portal, no one dared to go forward to see what happened. After all, the existence that can make an honest man like Wang angry is definitely not a good person. You can tell by listening to the words of the screams. Asshole, you are sneaking up on me without any moral principles. Ah, but this can't be blamed on Sherlock, right? After all, Sherlock would never have thought that the way the people of Kamartaj informed him would be so, down to earth. Chapter 499 Wanda's experiences at the New York temple. It's no wonder old Wang was so furious. If your usual buddies, who constantly yelled damn it, big brother, at the drop of a hat, were like Sherlock, you'd probably be even angrier than old Wang. As for old Wang's ability to beat Sherlock, well, strictly speaking, if they were in a life or death duel, Sherlock wouldn't even need to move a foot to completely crush old Wang. But perhaps because of the last time he'd ripped old Wang off, Sherlock still felt a tinge of guilt, so he didn't put up such a fierce fight. Well, when he first struck, Sherlock was still furious. With a look of "who the hell dared to sneak up on me," he turned around and tried to retaliate, but upon seeing old Wang's face, as dark as the bottom of a pot, Sherlock immediately withered. Old Wang, on the other hand, wasn't without measure. Despite his rage, he still managed his blows with a measured touch, perfectly managing to inflict pain on Sherlock without causing him any injury. As for Sherlock's resistance, honestly, if a fight broke out, Sherlock's thin frame wouldn't necessarily be enough to defeat old Wang's beefy build. The weight difference in a fight is incredibly impactful. As boxers, a lightweight fighter wouldn't be able to withstand a heavyweight's punches. It's a no-brainer. The two of them fought in flight for a while under Wanda's stunned and bewildered gaze. After a while of this, Wang finally relaxed and remembered why he'd called Sherlock in the first place. I'm exhausted. By the way, the Ancient One said Stephen's at the gates of Camartage and wants you to go. Wang spoke to Sherlock incoherently, panting as he leaned against the podium. Sherlock, who had originally looked exhausted and out of breath, suddenly stopped breathing after hearing old Wang's words. He snapped his fingers as old Wang gazed enviously at him. In the next second, the dirt and wrinkles on Sherlock's body from the previous fight vanished without a trace. Old Wang was tired of saying envy. Compared to the magic of Camartage, even if Wang hated to admit it, he had to admit that Sherlock's magic was truly a level above and beyond in terms of convenience. After cleaning himself up, Sherlock waved his hand at the still shocked and bewildered Wanda and said bluntly, "Let's go. I'll take you to resolve your magic problem. And we'll take you to the mountain for worship." Even though Wanda felt something was amiss, she still obeyed Sherlock's words, stood up, and followed him. Of course, Sherlock didn't forget to check in with his family. After all, the last time he and Tony left without saying goodbye, Sherlock had left a lasting impression on him, and even now, Sherlock's two favorite lightsabers were still in the hands of the two girls. With a casual gesture, Sherlock, under Wanda's resentful gaze, caused the paper Wanda had submitted that morning to levitate under Sherlock's magic. As old Wang watched enviously, the letters on the paper seemed to come alive, spontaneously forming a series of arrangements and combinations, transforming into a new letter. Then, as Wanda watched in astonishment, the newly formed letters folded themselves into paper airplanes and flew out the classroom door. After this, Sherlock led Wanda directly into the portal that Wang had left open. This was Sherlock's second visit to the New York Temple, and while he no longer held much curiosity, unlike Sherlock, this was Wanda's first time entering the Camartage New York Temple. Wanda was inquisitive about everything within. Old Wang seemed to notice Wanda's curiosity. After following the two into the temple, he began acting as a tour guide, explaining the New York Temple and some of Camartage's magical items. Wanda, in turn, felt like a novice entering the Grand View Garden, her eyes almost unable to see enough. She had initially assumed that besides herself and the wizard, there were no other magicians in the world. But as she walked through the New York Temple and observed the people coming and going, she realized how naive her assumptions had been. However, Wanda soon began to feel uneasy. The reason was simple: Sherlock and she stood out in the New York Temple. After all, the wizards of Camartage were essentially no different from the ascetics of the Muggle world, each clad in Camartage's iconic robes. However, Sherlock and Wanda were both dressed in standard casual attire, wearing the same gray pullover sweatshirt. Sherlock wore cargo shorts and a pair of AJ basketball shoes. Wanda's outfits were similar, the only difference being that Wanda, with her long hair, had tied her hair into a bun and was wearing Converse shoes. Of course, the most striking thing about them wasn't their outfits, but their sweatshirts. The same style of sweatshirt itself was inherently suggestive, and if you didn't look at Sherlock and Wanda's sweatshirts from the front, you might even mistake them for a couple rather than a mentor. After all, from the back, their sweatshirts were identical, each sporting a large, intricate pattern resembling an ancient family crest. Anyone who's seen HP would instantly recognize the meaning of the markings on their backs, a colorful version of the Hogwarts crest. Of course, even from the front, the expressions on Sherlock and Wanda's faces were strange, as Sherlock's shirt had the word teacher printed in large font across the front, while Wanda's was labeled student. Honestly, Wanda had initially resisted the idea, but Sherlock persuaded her with a series of arguments about school uniforms. As the two of them spent more time together, Wanda, somewhat influenced by Sherlock, gradually forgot the initial embarrassment she'd felt walking alongside Sherlock in the so-called school uniform. Unfortunately, after arriving at the New York Temple today, the stares from the surrounding mages brought back memories of that shame, especially when Sherlock, walking ahead, was completely oblivious and even greeted passing mages without hesitation. Wanda felt that her shame was about to explode, and she began to doubt whether it was the right thing for her to follow Sherlock to learn magic. Because she was too embarrassed, Wanda even started to ignore Wang's explanation and only wanted to leave this desperate place as soon as possible. Chapter 500, Wanda's camouflage experience. Wang watched Wanda, whose face had inexplicably turned red, and she was even a little afraid to look at anyone, completely bewildered. He scratched his butt, unsure of what was going on. But then again, if Wang could understand what Wanda was thinking, he wouldn't have known how he would still be single by the time Spider-Man No Returns came along. Seeing that Wanda had no interest in continuing his explanation, Wang ended his tour guide duties and quickly led the two back to camouflage through the portal in the New York Temple. Unlike the bashful Wanda, Sherlock, despite never having joined camouflage and even wearing clothes that didn't fit in with the camouflage decor, somehow didn't treat himself as an outsider. He acted familiar with everyone he met, constantly greeting the passing mages, as if possessed by Yu Jin, never letting his words slip. Luckily, Wang had some foresight. If Sherlock continued this way, his apprentice would have gone completely crazy. He quickly quickened his pace and led Sherlock towards the Ancient One's room. As it turned out, Sherlock and his group arrived just in time. They entered the Ancient One's room just as Stephen's soul had been knocked out of his body by the Ancient One. Sherlock smiled and greeted the Ancient One, Mordo, and Stephen's spirit form. Then, despite Stephen's surprised expression, he calmly sat down at the Ancient One's coffee table and began to sip his tea. It's true, no matter how many times he drank the Ancient One's tea, Sherlock was intoxicated. It was there that Sherlock realized the lingering fragrance wasn't just an exaggeration, but a reality. Unfortunately, the Ancient One never gave Sherlock any tea leaves, and no matter how much he fussed about it, he couldn't get any. Compared to Sherlock's composure, Wanda, who was following behind, was completely stunned. Despite knowing that magic existed, witnessing a soul floating in midair was still a source of surprise. After all, the soul had remained unexplored by human science throughout history, so it was understandable that Wanda, a graduate of the scientific Hydra labs, would be surprised upon seeing it for the first time. However, Sherlock felt a pang of disbelief every time he thought about it. Wanda, a magical mage, had been nurtured by Hydra, a scientific organization. The mere thought of it made Sherlock feel awkward. But clearly, compared to Wanda, the most unsettled person was Stephen, floating in midair. Honestly, upon seeing Sherlock, Stephen was completely bewildered, even briefly wondering if he'd been tricked. After all, Sherlock had told him about this place, and it was clear that he knew the exact address. However, Sherlock only gave him a rough approximation, which caused him immense hardship along the way, and even lost most of his savings on this trip. For a moment, Stephen felt utterly wronged, even feeling that all his suffering had seemed like a joke. After the Ancient One had resurrected Stephen's soul by placing it within his own body, Stephen's first action wasn't to question the Ancient One's tricks. Instead, he confronted Sherlock. "Sherlock, what on earth are you playing? Are you having fun playing tricks on me? Let me see, are there any cameras around recording my embarrassment? Don't you, the unscrupulous TV media, feel guilty about playing tricks on a patient desperate for medical treatment?" Stephen's expression was frantic, as if he had unwittingly participated in a reality show directed by Sherlock. He began to rant and ramble, constantly turning his head to search for hidden cameras. After hearing Stephen's rant, Sherlock paused, his hand holding the teacup slightly, a strange expression on his face. Well, Stephen wasn't entirely right, but he wasn't entirely wrong either. To hone Stephen's character, the Ancient One had indeed had him participate in a reality show, though the audience was likely the Ancient One, a single, dark-hearted, hard-boiled egg. It had to be said that, to some extent, Stephen's suspicions were close to the truth. However, Sherlock had no intention of revealing the truth to Stephen. He simply waved to Wanda, startled by Stephen's outburst, to sit next to him. Beyond that, he had no intention of paying attention to the drama. Wanda glanced from side to side, then at her unusually calm master, completely bewildered as to what was happening. She obediently ran to Sherlock and sat down, all the while wary of Stephen's increasingly frantic behavior, fearing he might explode and injure anyone. The Ancient One, looking at the enraged man, seemed about to say something, but after a moment's hesitation, he let out a silent sigh and tapped Stephen's head with a finger. Stephen was caught off guard and pushed down by the Ancient One's single finger. However, it was clear that Stephen didn't actually fall. Instead, he fell incredibly slowly, as if being dragged along by some force. Stephen's situation finally caught Sherlock's attention. It felt strange. The moment the Ancient One pushed Stephen down, a surge of magical energy descended upon him, washing over him repeatedly. Simultaneously, Sherlock, the Lord of the Latitude, also noticed a gaze descending upon Stephen. Unlike the aggressive powers of hell or the dark dimension, this gaze and power descending upon Stephen was filled with a peaceful energy, like a kindly old father gazing upon his newborn child. Of course, Sherlock noticed, but he didn't say much. He simply glanced at her and then stopped paying attention to Stephen. After all, this was Kamartaj's initiation ceremony, and Sherlock didn't want to ask any more questions. Having finished, Ancient One breathed a sigh of relief, turned around and sat down across from Sherlock. A kind smile returned to his face. He poured a cup of tea for Wanda, who sat a little stiffly beside him, and then poured himself a cup of tea. Everyone present was silent, waiting for Stephen's initiation to conclude. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.